All right, awesome. All right, welcome everyone to our last session. All right, we're going to start off with a pop quiz. Can you mute, please? I think there's a lot of static noise behind. I think it's coming from you.
How when I'm muted?
Okay.
I'm only suspect number one, but I'm muted. Everyone else seems muted. Where does that come from? Is it not your other screens or other things you connected?
Okay, I'll
since you're so fancy.
Okay, I'll live with
it. No, but it doesn't sound good. If you can identify it, we can also hear it.
Oh, I see. Yeah, I can hear some.
Yeah. You sure it's not from your end?
No, it's not. I'm just
everyone just make sure you're muted, but I think everyone is muted. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
Let's just continue.
Okay, sure. Okay, so let's start off with okay, it's gone now. Thank you. A pop quiz. So you have this dude. He apparently is in the car driving. Someone asked him a question. Hey, where are you off to? And it's like, no clue whatsoever. And then he asks this question. Must have an idea of where I'm going. What are your thoughts? This is a quiz. What conclusions about this individual? Any thoughts? You can just type it in the chat. Let's see if we have any answers. Oh, no thoughts whatsoever. Yeah, okay. The answers are clueless. You guys are so mild in your thought process. I would say he's nuts. Like, like, are you okay? You get into a car and you have no idea where you're going. That's rather. All right. So, but this is unfortunately this is what we do. So, unfortunately, this is what we do every time when we do research, right? You ask people, oh, so what's the hypothesis for your study? And they're like, oh, am I supposed to have a hypothesis? It is as ridiculous as this scenario we've pointed, right? Where the guy gets the car and has no clue where he's going. That's the exact same scenario that you put yourself in when you have a study you're trying to conduct and have no hypothesis whatsoever. The hypothesis is essentially saying that this is the direction I'm going. I don't know the exact point, but this is the general direction we're going, right? And this idea is very important because today's session was supposed to cover literature review and proposal writing. Both of these things are intimately tied with the idea that you have the hypothesis first. You have a direction you're going, right? So the moral of the story is every study must have a hypothesis. Lungi, I'm wondering whether I should sign off and sign back in. This is really getting on my nerves, the static. But anyway.
Yes, you can do that. Let's see what happens.
Can everyone just mute, please? I just want to make sure that it's not me. Can everyone kindly mute if you are not muted, please? All right. So the moral of the story, what we're trying to drive at is that every study must have a hypothesis. It doesn't matter whether it's a descriptive study. It doesn't matter whether it's, even a qualitative study should have a hypothesis of where am I going? What do I hope to find? Because think of it, right? If you don't have a hypothesis and you say, oh, I'm going to go and do a literature review, like what exactly are you doing there? You have no clue of where you're going. So that's just emphasized to us that we should always have a hypothesis. So if that's the only thing you take out of a class, then that's great. That every study must have a hypothesis, even if it's just a descriptive study, right? My study is prevalence of smoking in the US and among subgroups. Well, my hypothesis might be that there are disparities in smoking among population subgroups, maybe defined by age or gender or race, right? It's a descriptive study, but there is still a hypothesis. And when I'm doing my literature review, that hypothesis drives every single thing I do so that there's a direction to what I'm doing. So we're going to cover these two aspects today. We're going to talk about how do we go about the mechanics of literature review and drafting a proposal. Now, first things first, we want to acknowledge that writing is hard. If obviously we're writing a proposal or doing a literature review, there will be a a need for us to write, and writing is hard. I see a lot of complaints that there's no audio. Can you give me a thumbs up if you can hear me? This is up to a very, very rocky start today. I'm not sure whether it's from my end or from everybody else's end. Please
No, your audio is fine. We
Okay,
can hear
awesome.
you.
Okay, great. Okay. So writing is hard. This is one of my favorite papers ever. The title was The Unsuccessful Self-Treatment of a Case of Writer's Block. And the paper was published in a scientific journal, and there's literally nothing published in it. It's 0 words. And it's quite a joke, right? It's kind of scientific humor at its best. But it just illustrates the idea that writing is hard. And that's why we need to talk about how do we go through the process in a way that is practical and makes us get traction very easily. Now, before we go ahead, let's make sure that we clarify some things that are often confused. One is the confusion between the introduction and literature review. Those two things are different. A literature review is not the same thing as your introduction, right? So please, as a journal editor, I speak on behalf of all editors in this world, when we say, please do not submit a 200-page literature review as the introduction of your paper. Think of a literature review as things you do for yourself, right? Most of what you do in a literature review is for yourself, to inform you of what to do next. It's not for public consumption. And so most journals have a limit on the number of words that are even allowed. It's because of this reason that people just dump the entire literature review in the introduction, that journals have started putting limits on. This is the maximum number of words that you can have. So for example, if you look at, let me show you a popular journal, PCD. This is CDC's flagship journal, Preventing Chronic Disease. And this is a trend in most journals now, because authors just imagine that whatever they found in a literature review is good for public consumption. So no, it is not good for public consumption. It's just for yourself. So PCD, for example, requires that the introduction, this section should be no longer than 2 or 3 paragraphs or 300 words. That's all we need. We don't need you to take all the things you found in your literature review and dump them on us. That is not the point of the introduction. So several other journals have this kind of restrictions because there's just the observation that authors really do not understand the distinction between a literature review and an introduction. They just imagine that those two things are the same. So we want to clarify that very, very early on. Now, hold on. The second one is a literature review is not the same thing as systematic review. Of course, they both have the word review in them, but they're different. We're going to discuss more. Every systematic review involves some kind of literature review, but not every literature review is a systematic review. So we're going to talk more about the mechanistic differences between those two and what that involves for us. So let's look at some quick do's and don'ts when we're doing a literature review, and then we'll follow that up with some practical examples. So you have to start with a clear hypothesis. We've concluded that it kind of sounds nuts if you're starting a project and you don't even have a direction of where you're going. You're like that guy in the car who has no clue where he's going. So always start with a clear hypothesis. The hypothesis is what drives the methodology. So start with a clear hypothesis. You should document clearly. If you're doing a literature review, you should have your notes very clear. You should document every step of the way. What were your search terms? How many results did you get at each stage during screening of the, for example, titles or screening of the abstract? What did you encounter at each phase of the way? That is very important. You should know your objective, right? And that's very tied with hypothesis, right? We start off with, think of a journey of a research paper. We just start off with a rough idea. The idea is, wow, I wonder why this happens. From the idea, we move on to a hypothesis. The hypothesis then becomes, oh, I think that this is why this might be causing this. And so I need to investigate. So the idea comes first, the hypothesis follows. That's the natural cycle that we follow when we're doing research. Rough idea, then a hypothesis. Okay, I think that this is what might be driving this. Okay, let's investigate empirically. From there, I can now craft well-defined aims and objectives based on my hypothesis, right? And the aims and objectives are then what is executed in the study, right? So think of your aims and objectives as your hypothesis just crystallized into a more articulate form that can be investigated. So you should have clearly stated hypothesis, but you should also have clear stated objectives that will allow you to create an approach that works. And then you should follow the PICO framework. We discussed PICO last week. We'll talk about that during this time too. Then the don'ts. Don't just summarize. That's not the point of a literature review. A literature review is not just to summarize things and say, this is a summary. A literature review is to create inference, right? So you're going to infer. Because remember that we're trying to achieve two things when we do a literature review. Number one, we're trying to achieve or identify what the gap in knowledge is. And the gap in knowledge is not going to be written for you in black and white that this is the gap in knowledge. You have to infer that gap. So the inference, what it means simply is that you can now read that, oh, I see that this has been done, this has been done, that has been done, but it appears that nobody has written about this. There's this gap, right? So that's an act of inference. So it's not just about summarizing things and, no, that's not the point. The goal is to synthesize what you found. The second goal of a literature review is to tie your body of work to what exists. Obviously, we don't do research in a vacuum. Our body of work is tied to what has existed. And so, again, just emphasizing the point that the goal is not just to summarize, but to synthesize information. Now, there are lots and lots of software that claim to do literature reviews. I think it's very important to state that don't just use any software, whether AI or whatever, that just does literature reviews, right? And this is why it's very important for you to know what you're doing. So we'll go back to this point, know your objective. Remember that there are different types of reviews. Some are systematic, others are not systematic. So if you're doing a rapid review, sure, you can. If you're doing a review that is not systematic, sure, you can use anything you want. You can use any AI tool you want. But if your goal is to do a systematic review, and we shall talk more about this, then obviously the word systematic means that something is reproducible. So you have to be very careful. Not all tools are useful for all purposes. You need to know the limitations. And that's why it's very important for you to know what you're doing first. And you have to know where you're coming from and where you're going to. If you don't, then it's hard. And then don't plagiarize. So you need to know how to write properly, how to cite properly. And again, don't succumb to confirmatory bias. The goal of a literature review is not just to confirm what you know, it's to explore the broad realm of what has been published and to be balanced so that you come to speed on what exists in the literature. So again, we're going to be using PICO a lot. I mean, there is no class you come to that we will not talk about PICO in one way or the other, because it's a very solid framework through which we can look at a lot of things. For those of you who are coming for the first time, this is a formula or a framework that allows us to think about research in very concrete ways. So it's an acronym. P is population, I is intervention, the C is comparison, O is outcome, T is time, and S is study design. So we will talk about, in using the PICO framework, we'll talk about the FBR framework. FBR is another framework for just helping us write, right? FBR stands for fast, bad, and wrong. Let me see, I think I have it somewhere there. Well, I'll come back to later. But it's about how do you write fast? We'll talk about that in a minute. And how do you write smart? So the value of AI tools must be kept in perspective. It boils down to what are you trying to achieve? If your goal is to do anything that is systematic, then you obviously need to know that off the bat, the likelihood that you're going to be wrong is very high because there's nothing systematic in that approach, right? And so we'll talk about that in a minute when we get to that part. So starting from basic principles, why are we doing a systematic review? Well, a systematic review or a literature review is supposed to help us to transform the rough idea we have into a very shiny diamond. You can think of your rough idea as a diamond in the rough. And you want to create a very well-polished diamond from this diamond in the rough. So that means you have to remove some impurities. You have to remove some dirt. You have to, make it shine, right? And that process of removing impurities is what makes it shine. That is exactly what you're trying to achieve with the literature review. You're trying to remove layers of things that we already know or assumptions that may not be true, so that at the end of the day, you can come up with a gem that reflects what the gap in knowledge is. So the bottom line is that the literature review process is inherently a process of inference, where we can infer what does not exist or the gap in knowledge based on what we have already found. So this is the process we're going to talk about. Take a rough idea. We have a targeted literature review to confirm gap. We refine a research question. We set up objectives to answer the question, and then we analyze. So this is the whole research process in a nutshell. This is what research is all about. The process of coming up with an idea and then streamlining it until we then investigate and contribute. The goal is to contribute something new to literature. So that is why we do research. And there are many databases for assessing published papers, Embase and Cochrane and PubMed. We'll use the PubMed database to demonstrate how you could set up search terms and execute them today. And we will do that with PICO. Again, everything we do, we'll pivot to PICO or PICOTS to use as a framework so that we demonstrate how to do things. So we'll come back to PICO to see how we can use it to set up our search term for our literature review. Now, one of the challenges you'll experience in a literature review is you might end up with too many papers. You end up with 1 million papers, 10,000 papers. Obviously, nobody can read 10,000 papers. So the question is, how many is too many? And what happens when you have too many papers? Well, this is where you come back to PICO, right? There's a reason why the P in PICO is the first, because P drives everything. So if your results are too many, maybe you want to refine the search. And that's what each element of the PICO is doing. The P is to help you define inclusion or exclusion criteria. So it might be that your population is too broadly defined, and you might have to narrow it down a little bit. So we'll see how we can use the elements of PICO to set up our search terms in a way that our study results are not too many. Because if you have too many results, well, you're not going to read them. Your search is too sensitive. It's probably pulling things that are not so related to your work. And if you have too few results, well, maybe your search is too specific and you might need to make it a little bit more sensitive. So the sweet spot is where you don't have too many or too few. Now, if you're doing a systematic review, the goal is not just to get to this sweet spot. The goal is also to make sure that the next guy who comes and uses the same methodology as you did gets the exact same results as you did, if they follow the same parameters as you did. That is why we call it systematic. Systematic means something that is reproducible. So, like we said earlier, not every literature review is a systematic review, but every systematic review involves a review of a literature, obviously. We'll talk about some of these Boolean operators in setting up searches. A Boolean operator is just a magic word that allows us to make our search either more sensitive or less sensitive. So we'll talk about this. Primarily, we'll focus on or as well as and. We use them to control how our searches are. But just to give you a preview, or makes your results much more increase in volume, right? So A or B is a union of A as well as B, so it will give you more results. So think of or as more. See, you have or in more. So that means that when you use or, you're getting more results. When you use and, you're getting fewer results. Think of and as a wedding band. When people get married, that means they are tied together, right? And where one goes, the other must go too. That is what you're doing when you use and. And is restricting your results so that if I say smoking and cancer, I'm saying that give me only results where those two together are banded together. Right. So if I see only smoking but not cancer, that is a false. It will not return the result. Or it means if I see smoking or if I see cancer, even if they're not together, it should pull the results. So when we know how to use Boolean operators, it makes our results a bit more sensitive or more specific, depending on how we want to create a search. So here are some quick steps to create to follow for our literature review. First of all, we identify search terms. We can use mesh terms or keywords to increase sensitivity. mesh terms are, mesh is medical subheadings. When you write a paper, sometimes you remember journals will ask you supply keywords, right? Those keywords are things that you think capture the essence of your topic. They could just be English word, not necessarily based in science. Now, when you submit your paper, let's say to a journal and it gets published, one of the things that is done in the National Library of Medicine is indexing. So the staff at the National Library of Medicine, what they do is they take that paper that has been accepted and they use standard terms to categorize that paper under headings, right? Those terms are what we call mesh terms. They are standard terms that are used. They may or may not be the same thing as your keywords, but the point is that when you're constructing a good search term, you should use a combination of mesh terms and keywords so that it captures a broader range of findings. So the next step is to define our inclusion and exclusion criteria for other PICO elements. And this is where we use the Boolean operators. Again, we'll show this in practice in a minute. We'll look at studies from appropriate databases. Now, the number of databases we use will be a function of what kind of review we're doing. Remember, we said that every systematic review is a literature review, but not every literature review is a systematic review. Well, this is where it now boils down to in practice. If you're doing a systematic review, you are required to use at least 2 databases. If you're doing any kind of just rapid review or other reviews that are not necessarily systematic, you can just do anything you want. It never claimed to be systematic anyway, so you're fine. So that is why we go back to the original point. You must know what you're doing. If somebody asks you, what kind of systematic review are you doing? Or what kind of literature review are you doing? And you're like, oh, I don't know. That calls into question everything you're doing, because it's like, if they don't know what you're doing, then how should we interpret your results? Because a literature review could be a rapid review, it could be a mapping review, it could be a systematic review. Without knowing what kind of review you're doing, how then did you use how do you know you're using the right methodology? And if you don't even know whether you're even using the right methodology, how then can we even trust what you have done, right? So that's why the very first thing we emphasized was you must know what you're doing. You must have a hypothesis. You must have a direction of where you're going, because if you don't even know where you're going, everything you've done is just not useful. So we'll emphasize on that a bit more so that we're all on the same page. Next, we screen and assess the papers, and then we extract the data. We can synthesize data with a narrative review, which is just explaining in words, or a quantitative review, which is like creating bars or charts or doing a meta-analysis. Those are more quantitative ways of doing the data. Now, there are different types of reviews, like we mentioned, and it is very helpful for us to know the kind of review we're doing. In fact, you must know the kind of review you're doing for it to be meaningful. And the kind of review you're doing is a function of the kind of question that you're asking, right? So we can classify questions into 3 broad categories. Let's say the first one could be a very specific, predefined question. Is smoking associated with risk of lung cancer? See, that's a very specific question. Now, if we can define our question clearly with the elements of PICO framework, then the kind of review we'll do will be different. Next kind of question are just broad exploratory, right? We just want to know, like what's the lay of the land as far as this topic is concerned. We don't have a specific question per se, but we're trying to just know the lay of the land. Let's say you are a senior, faculty member, and you want to do research, you want to write a grant on, let's say, a new topic, and you tell your students, please just go and see what exists in the literature. See, in this case, you don't have a very clearly defined hypothesis per se. You don't have a well-defined question. That is what we mean by just a broad exploratory aim. So let's say we have a specific predefined question. The kinds of evidence synthesis that are available to us could be either a qualitative review of the evidence or a quantitative review of the evidence. Qualitative simply means we're not using charts or numbers. We're just describing. This does not mean qualitative research. It just means that we're synthesizing the evidence qualitatively, right? And qualitative synthesis means that there's no strict methodology, right? We don't have strict methodology in terms of evidence appraisal or things of that nature. And so when we do that, what results from that is a narrative review. When most people say they're doing a literature review, in many cases, this is what they have in mind. They are doing a more qualitative review where there are no strict criteria per se. They just take a search term and go and enter it into Google Scholar or PubMed, and some results pop out and like, oh, yes, my literature review. So this is what people sometimes mean when they think they're doing a literature review. The other form of evidence synthesis is one that is more quantitative. When it's quantitative, it's more comprehensive, it's structured, and we have rigorous criteria for inclusion and for appraisal of the evidence. And there are two kinds of quantitative evaluations for evidence. One is where we are going to pull the results together to get one average number. So let's say we have 3 studies, study 1, study 2, study 3. Our goal is to take those 3 studies and instead of having 3 results, get their average and say the average result is so and so. When we do that, that is called a meta-analysis. Meta means after. So think of the word metamorphosis. So meta-analysis means the analysis after the analysis. So the original guys did the analysis and gave us the results. And now we are doing an additional analysis on those results to take them and pull them together. So that's what we call it, a meta-analysis, the analysis after the analysis. Now, sometimes we don't want to combine the results or give an average number from all 3 results. We just want to look at those 3 numbers and say, and the results ranged from 2% to 10%. We are still describing numbers, but we're not pulling them together. And that's a systematic review. So a systematic review is still quantitative, but it does not necessarily involve numerically pulling the results together. So, like we said earlier, there's a lot of bias when you do a narrative review. And so when, like I said, when most people do a literature review, this is what they're doing. They take a search term, just go to Google Scholar, PubMed. There's no well-defined, it's not as if they're sitting down beforehand and saying, these are the inclusion criteria, these are the exclusion criteria, these are how the different elements of PICO fit in. They just go there and do whatever they want. So the problem is that if you go and repeat what they did, you are going to get different results, obviously, because there's no agreed protocol that you're following. So it's unstructured and it tends to lend itself to a lot of bias because people just cherry pick the results that they want. And so there's no critical appraisal involved. And so we need to be aware of the biases inherent in that kind of review. So there are tons of examples on that. Systematic review, like we said, it's more rigorous because there must be a well-defined criteria for what we're doing. And the whole point is, well, as the name implies, it's so that it is systematic. When we say anything is systematic in research, we mean that there is a formula to ensure that other people who repeat it will get the same thing we did. So we need to set the standard. We need to set the goalpost and say, this is the goalpost, and we will not move this goalpost. So that the next guy who comes scores in the same goalpost, just like we did. So you have to provide a protocol. You have to define the criteria, who gets in, how are we picking studies, how are we excluding studies, and all of that process, right? There, it has to be systematic for it to be a systematic review. So a systematic review cannot be done by one person. You can't just do a one-man show and say systematic review. At least 2 people must be involved. I search the databases, you search the databases, we compare our results, right? Also, you cannot just use one database and call it a systematic review. There must be at least 2 databases involved. So it's a very high bar when we call something a systematic review. So we want to be aware of that so we don't misuse terminologies. When we compare a narrative as a systematic review, a narrative review, like we said, it's subjective, meaning 2 people who do a narrative review on the same topic may get very different results. The questions tend to be broader. The methodologies are unclear. Not all relevant literature are included, and there is no critical appraisal. If you're doing a systematic review, all relevant literature must be included. You don't have the luxury to say, oh, I'm just going to exclude some of the studies because there are too many. No, if the studies are too many, Well, go back and redefine what the PICO elements are. Maybe if you have too many studies for you to handle, well, you should go back and define what the population is. So it's a case of redefining the population of studies, not just throwing out studies we don't want. So a systematic review must be done objectively and must be done based on a framework so that it is reproducible. If it is not, then it is not systematic. There's nothing systematic about it at all. So, and again, the reasons why we do systematic reviews is to, resolve issues of equipoise. Equipoise is where we are stuck in the middle of a road and we don't know, should we go left, should we go right? When the evidence leans either way, and a systematic review is done to shine light on that and to reduce confusion in the community. And of course, there are tons of examples of what a systematic review is. Meta-analysis goes a little beyond what a systematic review does by taking all those results and pulling them together to give you one pooled or average number. And so there are tons of examples in the literature if you care to search. So you can see all the different studies, and then you have a pooled effect, right? It takes all those numbers and summarizes all of them into one single number. In a systematic review, we're not summarizing all the numbers. So a systematic review could also have something like this. So let me show you. You could have a plot like this. You could still have a plot like this minus this one at the bottom. See, this rhomboid here is the pooling of all of these ones. So if you look at the graph like this, you might have a graph like this for systematic reviews as well, just that it won't have this rhomboid at the bottom that is a summary of all the numbers at the top, right? So that's a very important distinction between a systematic review and a meta-analysis. The moral of the story, what I was trying to emphasize is, please, when you're doing a literature review, you need to have an idea of what you're doing, right? It's not enough to say, oh, I'm just doing a literature review. The question that will then come is, what kind of literature review? Is it a mapping review, a scoping review, a systematic review, a meta-analysis? Because all of these are reviews of literature. So you need to have an idea, because the choice of review drives the methodology, and the methodology drives the result. Otherwise, you end up showing or sharing results that are based on faulty methodology and misleading the entire scientific community. And then when a question is broad or exploratory, we have two options. We can use a mapping review, or we can use a scoping review. A mapping review simply says, well, we want to map the evidence to this, right? We already have a well-defined scope. We know what the literature is. We just want to see, where is the literature distributed? What has been written on what? Right? That's the whole idea behind mapping things to different sections. A scoping review simply says, well, we want to know the scope. We don't even know the scope of this field. Let's try and understand the scope. Both of them are more open-ended. We don't have a closed-ended question. And so we do them. So the moral of the story is, when we have a research question, we look, is the question closed-ended or open-ended? If it's closed-ended, the options available to us will be a narrative review, a systematic review, or a meta-analysis. If it's open-ended, then the options available to us will be a scoping review or a mapping review. But you must know the kind of review you're doing, because it drives the methodology, like we've said over and over and over and over. And then sometimes we don't even have a research question. And the goal is just do a quick and dirty finding of what exists in the literature. Maybe we want to do apply for a quick grant, or the boss just told us, oh, go and do a quick review for me on this thing. And you're like, oh, what's the question? It's like, just go and find it. There's no research question in that case, but it's just to quickly see what is there available, right? So a rapid review, and sometimes when people say they're doing a literature review, they actually mean a rapid review. So there's no objectivity, no validity to a rapid review, right? It just gives a back of the envelope estimate of what exists in the literature for us so that we can, use it. And you find that a lot in the literature. So sometimes when people do a literature review, what they're actually doing is a rapid review. So we need to know clearly. So the steps involved in a systematic review, clearly we'll need to assess, is there a need for it? If it's systematic review, we have to assemble a team. Remember, it's not a one-man show. You can't be one person and do a systematic review, because there is nothing systematic about that process. We develop the research question. We define the inclusion and exclusion criteria based on our PICO framework. We develop a protocol, very important. It documented written protocol that says, these are the rules of engagement. Remember, the key word here is systematic. So if you say you've done a systematic review, the first thing I'm going to ask you is, where's the protocol? Like, the protocol tells us this is what was done and these are the rules of engagement. If you don't have a protocol, well, what you have is not a systematic review. We look at the studies, we do a review based on abstract and the title, we assess the quality, we extract data if it meets the criteria, we analyze, we interpret, and that's how we do it. The same inclusion and exclusion criteria that apply to people also apply to studies. So remember we said in the first lecture, we talked about the PICO framework, and we said that inclusion criteria are those criteria that screen people in or out. So think of this right there as putting your arms around the group and saying, everybody who falls in my embrace is part of the study. Everybody who falls outside of my embrace is not part of the study. Well, that's what inclusion criteria do. So here, all these people inside the cycle are screened in by the inclusion criteria. And all the people in red outside are screened out by the inclusion criteria. Now, within the people who have embraced, I can now pick some people and say, hey, you meet the inclusion criteria, but for certain reasons, I cannot allow you to proceed. So I take this guy and I pick him out. That is what the exclusion criteria are, right? Exclusion criteria applies to people who otherwise have met the inclusion criteria, but for whatever reason cannot proceed. The same principle we apply to humans also applies to studies. So when we define our study criteria, we have to define inclusion criteria and exclusion criteria. So inclusion criteria might be based on a PICO framework, then exclusion criteria could be based on maybe paper is written in English language or certain other criteria that applies to studies that otherwise met the inclusion criteria but have to be removed for one reason or the other. There are many databases that can allow us to search. PubMed, like we mentioned some of them earlier. So if it's a systematic review, you need to include at least 2 of those. And then the gray literature. The reason why we use the gray literature is to address issues of publication bias. Every journal wants to publish the hottest issue, right? You run into challenges when your result is not significant. So obviously then there's a bias of the published literature towards results that are significant. So it's always great to review the gray literature to see or to quantify the extent of publication bias. And this could include theses that have been published or, conference abstracts or papers and many others. Then you will screen. Screening of the articles involve reviewing the titles. And this is why you want to pay very close attention to how you frame your titles in your papers, because your title and your abstracts are the first points of encounter with the outside world. So please don't just use some, your title is not a joke. It's not a where you try to be funny or cute, right? Make sure that it's informative, because that's the first encounter people will have with your paper. And so you screen by the title. If it meets, then you screen the abstract. If it meets, then you review the full text of the paper. So that's just what we're saying here. And you want to, if you're doing a systematic review, you want to be very careful of biases from the design of a study and its execution, because those things are very important. In a systematic review, there must be appraisal of evidence. That's something you don't do with rapid reviews or the others. And appraisal of evidence simply means the studies we included, how good are they anyway, right? In terms of bias. So you're looking at threats to both internal and external validity. So it's something we want to be aware of. Now, when we do all of this, we need to write the paper. So, or the proposal. We're focusing on proposals today. So we need to follow the FBR framework. FBR is just an acronym that says fast, bad, and wrong. And yes, you might say, oh, wrong is W, but that's the whole point. We're writing it so fast that we had typos and wrote wrong as an R. But that's the whole idea behind the framework, that you should just write. The first draft of your work should be really, really messy. In fact, if you pick the first draft of your work and you're not ashamed of yourself, then you did not write correctly. So the FBR framework allows you to do that. Even scripture tells us there's a time for everything. There's a time to write and a time to edit. You can't be writing and editing at the same time. And this is the hallmark of people who are new to research or new to writing. They'll write one sentence and then they'll go back and change the font and admire it and rewrite it. No, like, what are you doing? Just write. One tip that could help you is just to use dictation software, and just speak and just communicate your thoughts. It doesn't matter where the typos, right? We'll worry about typos later on. The whole point of the first draft is just to capture the big picture, not the fine text, So that's the whole idea behind the FBR. There's a time to birth ideas and a time to refine them. We can't create content and overhaul the content at the same time. It's not possible. So if you want to be a good writer, you need to be familiar with the FBR approach and use that for your writing. All right, so what we're going to do now is we're going to see how you can use AI tools to help you with the process, but obviously being aware that there's a limit to which you can use them, right? That is determined by even the kind of thing you're doing. If you're doing a systematic review, you should already know the biases. So that is why researchers should have a fundamental understanding of what they're doing. It's not just about plugging in numbers into any software and getting the result. Like, what are the underlying assumptions? How do you interpret it? Those are key things that we need to concern ourselves with. So what we're going to do now is we'll take a topic from somebody, and we're going to see how we can take that topic and we can use our PICO framework to define the key elements of that research question, how we can create a search term or search terms. I'll show you how you can use ChatGPT as your thought partner, and then how we can refine it and then see, run it in PubMed and, refine our search accordingly. And then finally, how we can create a very first draft of our proposal, also with the AI toolkit on the Chisquares platform. All right, so what we'll do now is we'll need somebody who would volunteer a topic for us to use for the sake of our demo, so it's just not abstract. So we'll just take that topic and then we'll just use that to demonstrate the elements of PICO and the other elements of what we just said. So any volunteers? Lunge, do you want us to take questions now, or should we just go ahead and take questions afterwards?
Afterwards, please.
Okay, all right, sounds good.
I'll just use this opportunity to also ask people to not ask for the evaluation survey until you finish with the presentation and the demo. Thanks.
All right, do we have any take?
Solomon, you can unmute yourself. Otherwise, others can also type.
Yeah, you can just type in the chat box.
I would wish to use the inclusive education and social cohesion in primary schools in Uganda. Something like that.
Sorry, what was the topic?
Inclusive education and social cohesion in secondary schools in Uganda.
Okay. Okay, all right, I'll try. So inclusive what? Education, you said? Okay, you know what? I'll just pick a topic that exists, that has been typed, just for, unfortunately, I didn't hear it very well. So, but again, let me just illustrate what I was talking about FBR. You see, when you're typing, see typos, don't worry about them. My personal thing is I live and die by dictation software. So if you use Microsoft Word, you see here, there's dictate. Try and use that feature. It will make you a much faster writer. So just put on the dictation soft part, and then you can just dictate, right? As you dictate, the software writes everything you're writing or you're saying, and then afterwards, you can simply take that text and then edit it, full stop. Obviously, as you are dictating, you have to enunciate grammatical commands. For example, if I want to say full stop, I have to say full stop. Next line. That's how you dictate. Right. I think if you do that, it's going to tremendously, make you a much faster writer because number one, it prevents you from the snare of stopping and admiring your work. You just talk and talk and talk. And so, especially for those of us who do a lot of writing, right? I'm not sure how people survive without using dictation, but that's one trick you can use to make you a much faster writer. All right, let's go on today. All right, this is the topic that no, not that. Okay, I'm trying to look for a topic that will appeal to a lot of people. So let's and the topic that is not from Nigeria. Nigerians always dominate this discussion. So let's give the other folks a chance. So all right, let's see. Let's see. I'm looking for a topic. These are very good. These are all very, very good topics here, I must say. Okay, let me just pick one and I'll move on. Role of oh, that's too niche. I'm looking for the one in Uganda. For whatever reason, I missed it because I know that today. Okay, good. I found the one that the person originally typed. So inclusive education and social cohesion in secondary schools, in primary schools. So the whole point of FBR is, as you're typing, don't bother whether you're making mistakes. Please, don't ever go back and say, I want to correct a typo. Just type and go. In Kirianongo, Uganda. All right, that's a research question. Now, when we're creating a research question, we obviously want to make sure that we frame it in a way that will be published, because we're not just trying to write for writing's sake. Ultimately, hopefully, we want to get it published in a scientific journal. So that means that we have to worry about impact and novelty. Two things, right? Impact means like, how will this move the needle on anything? And there are different ways we worry about impact. So first of all, there is no definition of what impact is. It's a very subjective construct. What is impactful to you may not be impactful to me. But as far as publication is concerned, whose opinion is the most important as far as what is impactful? Who can guess? Your definition of impact is different. You, the author, my definition as the editor is different. Who do you think carries more weight in this debate about what impact is? This is a very complicated. Yes. Well, somebody said the reader, and that person said the writer. No, it's the editor. It can't be you because you're not going to publish yourself, right? Are you? It's the editor. The editor's decision or perceptions about what is impactful carries a lot of weight. Now, the role of the editor, you have to remember, it's not just to. The editor is not there to serve at your pleasure. The editor's primary job is to grow the journal. All right. As the editor-in-chief, my job is to grow the journal so that the readership of the journal is increased. I want the journal to be read, to be adopted in many countries. I want the work published to my journal to spark debate, so that I want things to be controversial, because controversy means that more people read it, and it's great. So when you now come with your topic that I look at it and I'm like, okay, sure, the science is great, but this is extremely boring. Or this is something that we already know, and I know as an editor that there is no way this is going to grow the journal. You might end up with a rejection. So when you are framing research, you need to put yourself in the shoes of the editor, and you need to see what is the editor's concern? What do I think the editor is concerned about? So let us try and frame this. We'll take this research question here and frame it in a way that is a bit more impactful. So number one, we would one of the issues that define impact is the population of interest. So we're going to use PICO, remember? PICO is our go-to for everything. So first of all, the PICO is the population, right? And the population here, we're looking at who is the study directed at? Now, the narrower your population, the less impactful it is. This subject is not looking at just the whole of Uganda. It's looking at a small community in Uganda. Now, when this paper comes to me as an editor, I'm going to say, what is the likelihood that a guy who lives in the US, the UK, Australia, in Nigeria, or in South Africa, or wherever else, will care about what's happening in this place? That's the first question I'm going to ask myself, right? So the topic might be interesting, but it's like, how is it relevant to audiences outside of this place? So one of the ways to increase the perceived impact of your paper is to see how you're going to address the issue of population, right? So is it possible for me to look at a national sample, for example? Obviously, the perceived impact of that work will be much greater than looking at a much smaller group. So the first thing I'm going to do is to just make this population a little much broader so that it has a little more relevance to other populations. So I'm going to strike this part out. Now, we also have a statement here, but not a research question yet, right? This just says inclusive education and social cohesion in primary schools. The question is, so what about inclusive education? Like, what exactly are we trying to evaluate? It's not very clear from the research what we're trying to do. So my task now is to sharpen the research question. This is a statement. I need to pull out what is a specific research question from that whole thing, right? To do that, I'm going to quickly use I will use the AI toolkits on the platform, but let's see how the possible options we can have to take that statement and redefine it into a research question. So let's do that quickly. So I'm going to go to the Chisquares platform and let's look at how we can create a well-defined research question from that statement. So let's go to the AI toolkit and we'll go to research question generator. And we're just going to type in that statement there. I'm going to remove that community so that it's a bit broader. Oops. So remember what we're trying to do now is to simply carve a research question from this statement so that we can then decide which direction we're going. Remember, like that guy who sat into the car but has no idea where he's going. We don't want to be like that guy. So we need to have a sense of which direction are we going, right? So that's what we're trying to do now. So let's generate a research question from this. And so that will help us give us some direction for where we're going. And for those who are just joining us for the first time, the Chisquares platform is a tool that allows you to, do various aspects of research process. For now, what we're just trying to do is take that research question and get some sense of what we want to do with it. So the platform has different elements. There is, allows you to conduct surveys and sample and so many other things. So you can explore it on your time. But for now, let's go back to our research question, which was this here, where we're still trying to generate. Now, while that is generating, let us look at some tools that can help us with the process of literature review. Let's look at some of them. PubMed, we're going to use PubMed to help us get some results. We're also going to let's also use ChatGPT to see how we can use it to create search terms. So here we have ChatGPT. let's see how we can use ChatGPT to create search terms for us to search in PubMed. So the idea here is, let's say you want to do a search and you have no idea about how to create a search term. So we can come here and use, AI to at least give us some ideas about how to do it. So let's do that. So let's say, given the input, so when you're using AI or ChatGPT, you have to create a prompt. A prompt is simply a command that tells the AI what to do, right? To write a good prompt, the more nuanced the prompt, the better it is in terms of giving you the results you want. So in general, when you're defining your prompt, you want to define the input very clearly. So here, I'm saying this is the input, and then you give it the task that it's supposed to do, right? The task here, I can say, as a world-class researcher, create a search term to be used in PubMed for literature review on the topic above, the input topic. So that's the task that I want it to do, right? It should take the input terms and then create a search term. So I'm going to give it requirements. So you must follow the following requirements. So number one, I want it to use the PICO framework to create the search terms. Right. Two, I want it to optimize for a balance between sensitivity and specificity. So I don't want too many results or too few results. So it should create a search term in such a way that it optimizes for that. It's sensitivity. And number three, use a combination of mesh terms. Remember, mesh is medical subheading terms, which are the formal, think of it as official keywords, and think of your own keywords as informal keywords. So use a combination of mesh and keywords to capture the breadth and depth of the topic. All right, so this is just a simple prompt, all right? So it has an input, it has the task that I want it to do, and I've clearly provided requirements. But obviously, the more specific your prompt is, the better the results. So let's run this and let's see what it gives us. Okay. All right, so this is what it has provided. Primary schools, which is a mesh term, or elementary schools, which is a mesh term, or primary education. TIAB means title or abstract, or elementary school, or social. So again, you see, it's using a combination of the Boolean operators, or. Remember that or gives you more results because there's or in more, so it gives you more results. Whereas and makes it more restrictive. So we're saying, give us any of the schools and any of its titles, right? Or and so on and so forth. So let's take this. So we'll copy this. The next step for us now is to go into PubMed and document and search it. Now, remember we said that when we're doing a systematic review or literature review, you must document every single thing. Documentation must be something you do every step. So don't just take this thing and go to PubMed and run the search, and then tomorrow you forgot what you did. You need to create a document like this, a Word document, and say search terms, and you paste it there. And if you change them, you document clearly so that you can follow what you're doing. So when you come tomorrow, because when you're writing the paper, you have to tell us what the search terms were. It's not then that you start wondering, I wonder what search terms I used. Obviously, that's not going to work. So you have to document very carefully. Now, let's go to PubMed and let's see. Let's look at the search terms we entered. PubMed is pubmed.gov, and we can search. Now, this gave us 0 results, right? Now, what does that tell us? It means that this search term is obviously too specific. So we'll have to find a way of making the search more, less specific. So we're going to look at the terms here. Let's go back to our search terms here and see what to do when you have results that are too many or too few. Now, when the results are too few, the problem lies with and, right? So whenever you have results that are like too few results, in this case, we had 0 results. 0 results, the culprit will be and. When you have too many results, the culprit is or. So because you're saying this or that, right? You're getting a lot of results. So you should all become expert in knowing what might be the problem if I'm having results that are either too many or too few. What part of the results do I need to edit? So here, for example, I can say, okay, let's just see all of the body of work that exists, not just in Uganda, right? Let's just expand that. Let's remove this last and here, and let us make sure we just capture the breadth of the work before we drill down. That's one strategy. So let's do that and see what that gives us. Let's go back to this, and we okay. So still we have 0 results, right? Because it's not returning. So there's something wrong with that search. So we now have to either go back again and explore further, right? So let's go back to the topic here. So when doing a literature review, you want to start broad. Think of it like a funnel. Start broad and then narrow, right? But at every step of the way, you must document. So document very clearly. So in the principle of starting broad and narrowing down, we can say, okay, for the first step, let's just look at the primary schools or this part here. And let's put that on the Word document and edit the elements. That was not search term. So let's make it very sensitive. Sensitive means that we're going to get more and more results. So one option to see just how much literature exists in that topic is to just, first of all, make it as broad as possible. And as broad as possible means let's just take this here and see, first of all, is that even the topic that even has anything published on it, right? So we put that topic in there and search, and this is just to see how many topics even exist on that topic in the first place. So we see this is not an awfully published topic, right? When we just do the broadest of the broadest searches, we see only 14 results from the whole entire search. Well, and this is one of the things we also want to be very careful when what we're doing is a systematic review. If you're doing a systematic review on a topic that has very little publications on it, the question then is, what are you exactly reviewing? For you to do a systematic review, there has to be sufficient amount of work published, because here we only have 14 results. By the time we start applying restrictive criteria, let's say we want papers published only in the past 5 years. Now we're down to 8 papers already. When we now start saying, oh, we want papers that have only free full text, that there's actual text to it, and many other criteria, we end up with a very, very little number of papers, right? So the moral of the story is start broad and then narrow, because if you start applying very, very restrictive criteria, you don't even know how many papers are in that, how many papers have been published on that topic, period. So starting broad allows you to see the full scope of the work, and then you can narrow down. In general, it's always good to use more recent publications so that your work is reflective of the current landscape. The only exception to that will be things that are reflecting the biological relationship. If I'm looking at the relationship between smoking and lung cancer, well, it doesn't matter whether the paper was published 20 years ago, or 10 years ago, or today, right? It's a biologic relationship. If I'm looking at the relationship between, smoking and, let's say, let's say some social construct, that is more subject to evolutions in culture, right? So things that are social, we want to make sure that we're restricting our work to, maybe the past 10 years, because the literature evolves very rapidly. So the moral of the story, again, start broad and then narrow down, but at every step, you must document clearly what you have done in that phase. Now, when you use PubMed, one of the things you can do is, I will encourage everybody to create an account with the National Library of Medicine so that you log in. When you don't log in, after a few hours, so let's say we send this paper to our clipboard, that was sent to clipboard. So when we go to the clipboard, you see that your clipboard expires after 8 hours of inactivity. So imagine you spend hours doing a literature review and sending your references to your clipboard, and you somehow left. You thought you were going to come back in 2 hours, but of course, life always happens. You came back 10 hours later. Imagine all your work is gone. So I will encourage, it's free, create an account in NLM so that your work is, your history is very well preserved. So when you're doing a literature review, it's always a great idea to send your papers to clipboard. So as you find the paper you like, send it to clipboard, and then you can look at your clipboard. You can save your work if you want to download the work that you've done. You can save it in any format. I can choose to save it as a CSV file, for example, so that all of the work is, if I create the file, it automatically creates, let's look at the file. It creates the references as a, let's look at the file quickly. But anyway, I'll leave that. You can please go and practice. It's free, PubMed. Try sending things. That's your homework for the day. Send things to clipboard. Create an account so that you have your history preserved, and then you do your literature review. Send things to the clipboard, and then download in your preferred format, which you can then import into your reference manager. Now let's go back to the AI toolkit we're looking at. So remember, this was a topic we had: inclusive education and social cohesion in primary schools in Uganda. So what the AI toolkit has helped us in doing is that it has taken that topic and given us research questions. So for example, what is the relationship between inclusive education and social cohesion in primary schools in Uganda? Now, that is a research question. It's not just a statement. There's some direction about what we're doing. And there's also a hypothesis. The hypothesis for each aim, for example, aim 1 is that inclusive education has a positive impact on social cohesion in primary schools in Uganda. You can't do research without a hypothesis. The hypothesis, it doesn't even matter whether it's a descriptive analysis or analytical study or even a qualitative study. There has to be a hypothesis that you're following. Obviously, not all hypotheses are testable statistically. If it's a qualitative hypothesis, obviously, you're not going to test it with, statistics. But you must have a hypothesis which allows you to know the direction you go in. So now with this, we can at least, the advantage of this is it allows you to develop some specific research questions. It gives you quite a bit of research questions. Here I have like 15 of them I can explore and then decide on which ones to use. Now, when you use an AI tool, it is your responsibility to make sure that what you're getting makes sense, because AI can obviously make mistakes. So an AI tool is not supposed to be the final bus stop. It is just supposed to help you to get a very nice version 1 to start. But it's almost irresponsible if you now just take that draft that has been given to you by AI and just say, oh, this is the final product. That is not the design or the intention. Now, what if I wanted to write a proposal? Like we said, this is the topic we have, and we want to write a proposal. We don't just want a research question. We want an actual proposal, like a first draft of our research proposal. Well, we can go back to the AI toolkit here, and there's another tool there we can use to write a proposal. And like I said, it is just supposed to give you a version 1.0. It is now your job to take that version 1.0 and then refine it accordingly. So let's go to the research proposal builder, and let us see the elements that we're required to put in. So first things first, we're asked to provide a project title. I'm just going to paste that title we had. The research idea, I'm just going to still paste that, the same idea. You don't have to provide a whole lot of details. It just needs a little information to proceed. The study type, the platform can help you develop research proposals for different kinds of studies, case control studies, cohort studies, cross-sectional studies, and so on. This is a cross-sectional study. I'm not sure what the design is. Of course, we can exploit it as any number of ways, but to keep it simple, I'm just going to go with cross-sectional. The country is Uganda. So we're going to see how it helps us to give us a version 1.0. And the research team, I'm going to put Longile as our principal investigator. Qualifications, PhD. And the role is, the principal investigator. And we're going to say, again, the relevant experience, you don't have to write a whole lot of stories. You can just, whatever you want to put there. So let's say something as simple as 10 years experience in, educational research. And that's all we need for the proposal. If we have more team members, we can add them. And we can now create a proposal. So it takes this idea we have, and it's going to take the elements of PICO and give us a version 1.0. Again, the goal is not for you to take that version 1.0 and go and submit that as a final draft. No, it's to help you iterate. AI is just a tool. Just the same way we are using dictation in Microsoft Word or using any other AI tool. It's just supposed to help you, but it's your job to make sure that what is provided is accurate and that it fits the context. So we'll come back to this in a sec, and we'll see what that looks like. But it's going to write the elements of the proposal, the background, the aims, and every other thing, and then we'll come back to this and see what it has generated. But yeah, so in a nutshell, that's while we wait for it to create our proposal, maybe we can take questions now. I saw a couple of hands up, so maybe we'll take their questions.
Ishmael, can you unmute yourself? Chris, you are next.
Thank you. You have answered my first question already, sir. You have talked about qualitative studies. You said there is no need for testing, or there is no way of testing hypotheses for qualitative data. So I think that I said to that is my first question. The second question I have is about the Chisquares platform. If I collect data, maybe through any electronic tool, not necessarily Chisquares, and I want to test my hypothesis, I collected quantitative data, and I want to test my hypothesis. Is there a way I can impute the data into Chisquares platform and test my hypothesis the way I can do it with SPSS, R, and other statistical tools like that?
Yeah, so we're releasing the full. So what we have now is just a preliminary version of the platform. We're releasing the full version of the platform in a few, a few weeks from now. So that will have all the features. So then you can be able to do that.
Thank you.
Welcome. All right, next question.
Yeah, Prof, can you hear me?
Clearly, yes.
All right, thank you very much for the presentation. So, please, I was just wondering that if you use the National Library of Medicine to search for discourses or papers that are related to social sciences, precisely this topic of the conditions of primary school education in terms of cohesion and inclusivity of education in Uganda, you might find, because that's my thinking, you might find little outcome like you found 14 results. What about using things like Google Scholar and other platforms that are more tailored towards the social sciences and humanity?
Okay.
Because that topic is a big topic.
I agree with you. And so when you're using PubMed, as the name implies, PubMed, it's more about topics that have to do with the medical literature. Now, that is why if you're doing a systematic review, you must use at least 2 databases. The reason why that requirement is there is to prevent database bias. Why? Because PubMed is an institution of the United States government. For those of you who are journal editors, you will realize how much a pain it is to have your journal indexed in PubMed. Obviously, there's a preference, or there's when you look at the geographic, let's just say that when you look at the geographic representation of journals indexed in PubMed, it is not just a random sample. Let's just put it that way, right? So there's a bias inherently in the part of the world where the papers are coming from when you use PubMed. That is because it is owned by the US government and it's an American institution. And that's why it's required that when you're doing a systematic review, there must be at least 2 sources of databases to use. Now, the databases that you could use, I shared them in an earlier slide. However, you cannot use Google Scholar. Google Scholar is, in fact, the Cochrane specifically calls out Google Scholar as something you should not use because it's not a medical database. It's not a research database. The article you are pulling from Google Scholar could have been written by a 7-year-old child who lives in his mother's basement, right? It could include any number of unverified, non-peer-reviewed material, which could taint the evidence or which could just be junk science. So for that, Google is not counted as among the databases you could use. But if you're trying to do a systematic review, you must have at least 2 databases to use. Now, if your work is just a rapid review, well, then you don't even have to worry about all those requirements because there was never a claim that it was going to be systematic. It was just a quick and rapid review. So this requirement for validity only applies to things that we are going to imbue with a sense of validity, right? Which are when we're doing systematic review and when we're doing a meta-analysis where we expect that there will be objective appraisal of the evidence, where we expect that the methodology will be objective. For all the other ones, we already expect that the methodology is not objective anyway. So it's not a real requirement per se. But for those 2, yes, it's a strict requirement that it has to be that way. And that's why we said we keep emphasizing that you must know the review you're doing. It's absurd if you're doing a literature review and somebody asks you what kind of review are you doing, and you're like, I don't know. It's like, how do we trust what you're doing when you don't even know what you're doing or the right methodologies to employ? But that's a very good question. Now
Right, thank you.
Welcome, yeah. So before we move on to the next question, let's quickly look at the output of this the topic, the proposal. So it gives you again, important reminder, this is AI generated work. So it is never intended for you to take it and just grab it and run and go and do whatever. You're supposed to read it and make corrections. Remember we talked about FBR, fast, bad, and wrong? Well, this is supposed to be the FBR version 1 for you to sit down and iterate over. It's not meant to be the final source of truth. But anyway, that as may be, let's look at the output. So you have background that gives you some context for the work. It says that, it gives an introductory statement. and says that while previous research has examined the impact of inclusive education on student relationships, there's a gap in comprehending the effects of this inclusive education on social cohesion. And it goes on and provides a compelling justification for the work. So overall, that's what this part of the proposal is doing. It says, what do we know on this topic? What is the gap? And how do we set the stage for this work? Next, it gives you some specific research questions, aims and objectives. So in this case, aim 1 is to investigate the impact of inclusive education on social cohesion. Aim 2 is to investigate the role of community involvement in promoting social cohesion in primary schools in Uganda. And the third aim is to explore the long-term effects of inclusive education on social cohesion. It establishes the significance of the work. It says that, this study could enhance understanding of the role inclusive education plays in promoting social cohesion. Additionally, by investigating the role of community involvement, the long-term effects, blah, blah, blah. This research has the potential to provide valuable insights for policy development and practice in Uganda's primary schools. And so the whole goal is to provide or promote a more cohesive school environment. And that the results of this research could transform practices and influence policy decisions that foster, social cohesion. And then it talks about the innovation. It says that the study will implement a mixed methods survey, and it then discusses some other methodologic novelties in the study. The approach, it discusses the methodology for each aim. It discusses the strengths and limitations, and it discusses the research team based on the information we had provided in that form. The principal investigator is Dr. Lungilen Kosi, who has a PhD in education and brings 10 years of experience in educational research, and discusses why the principal investigator brings value to the work. It discusses dissemination and the direction, and how this work could build future work. And it suggests some research papers that are expected to be produced from the current work, like some descriptive analysis and others. It suggests a budget for the work and justifies the budget. And then it provides references. There's zero probability of hallucination because the references are based on databases, not just AI. So now, is this the final version? No. Should this be the final version? No. But is this a good first draft for you to build your work? Yeah. So it prevents you from the stress of, this is the biggest challenge to writing. This one here, starting from a blank sheet of paper. So what that does is that this saves you from this challenge. So instead of starting from a blank sheet of paper, you have at least something to start from. So that's the whole idea behind it. So then you can then build on that subsequently. All right, next question.
Okay, before we move to the next question, everyone, we are sorry about the link. We will share a new link very soon. So just give us 5 minutes or so. We'll share another link. Thank you. Okay, let me see. Someone posted a question. If you posted a question earlier, please post it again because there's a lot of text, so I can't get through it at the moment. So I'm just going to look for those who've raised their hands for now. Kelvin.
Okay, good evening, sir. Prof, thank you so much for this opportunity. Prof, please, I want to ask a question as a young researcher. I want you to guide me through how to write. Let's assume we don't have AI. I want you to guide me how to write the research from the beginning to the end. Look at AI. Then, secondly, okay. Okay, go on, sir.
No, sorry, I interrupted your thought. Please go ahead and finish your line of thought.
Okay. Okay. Let's say the second one is, if I'm using Chisquares, when it gave me at least a guideline, then if I want to do a verifiable research, maybe in PubMed, so how can I take that, what Chisquares gave me, to do a more verifiable research on PubMed? Will I just copy everything and put on PubMed, or will I take some segment, paragraph by paragraph, so that I'll be able to have a good references, both in text reference citation and my final references probably if I'm using maybe the various references format like Vancouver, PUB, so on and so forth.
Okay, thank you. First question, how can you become a good writer? Practice. Obviously, we can't go into the mechanics of writing in a few minutes. So, but you have to be willing to be laughed at. If you feel uncomfortable with people laughing at you, you can't be a good writer. So if you're a new writer, my suggestion is practice, practice, practice. Writing is both a science and an art. And that second part, the art part, is very important because if you want to learn how to play an instrument, you're going to suck at the beginning. But if you practice more and more, you can then become better, right? So that's what will happen. So pick a topic and just see, how do I start, right? Don't worry about just start, take a blank sheet of paper, write introduction, methods, results, and discussion, right? Because there's something scary about having a blank sheet of paper. At least now it's no longer a blank sheet of paper. At least we have something on paper now. And then when you start writing, the goal is just to provide information. It's not for it to look fancy, right? So for introduction, what do we know? What don't we know? Why must we know? Right? Simple questions, and just answer them. Methods: what, where, when, how, right? Like, what was the data? Where was it collected? When was it collected? How? Simple. Answer them. The results. Again, you provide the key elements of one variable analysis, which is what we call just univariate analysis. Two variable analysis, which is bivariate analysis. And in all of this, you follow FBR. If you make typos, do not go back to correct them. Just write and move on, right? FBR means the first draft of your work should just absolutely suck. And that's great. That means you're a good writer. And then 3+ variable analysis, which is multivariable, right? How you present them. Then discussion, like, make it just three simple paragraphs. What is the summary of the results and the key findings, right? What did you find surprising? And how does it compare? And so what? So we find these results, so what? So what does it mean for us? That's all. So by following this, you will just write, you don't have to adhere to, there's no fancy language you need to adhere to, so forget about sounding fancy. Just pour out what you have found on paper, and you have a paper. Your second question, I kind of didn't understand it, but it's like, if you're using a proposal, how do you verify? Well, it's a proposal. It's not verifiable. Proposal is just saying this is how we are going to do the research. We are proposing. The word proposal means you're proposing to do your research this way. Proposal is not meant to be verifiable. So maybe I didn't understand your question, but that's about that. So bottom line, just go and write and fumble and make mistakes and get better. The more you write, the more you get better. Okay, next question.
I want to read something. Can we use tables in qualitative research?
Yes, you can. You can decide to put, you can say, let's say you can have, let's say, theme you are addressing, you can have, let's say, corresponding quotes. right? The theme is social cohesion. The theme, the quotes were, this person said this person said that. So of course, table can be used for anything. Table is just a way of organizing results into a way that is easier to read. Anything can be put into tables. You know, so it's not, tables are not just a sole possession of structured data. Anything at all can be put into tables.
Thanks, Prof. Someone says, I need more emphasis on literature review, sir, more especially the empirical review, weaknesses, strengths, and gaps. Can I read another question?
Yeah.
When you generate a proposal from the Chi-Squares platform, it gives you multiple hypotheses precisely for every research question. Please, which should I use for my work?
It's not giving you a hypothesis for every research question. So here is the flow, right? One research question then dovetails into multiple aims. The aims are essentially, this is where we're going, right? How do we then break that journey into different parts and solve for it, right? That's what aims are. Aims is like, this is the big picture of where we're going, but we're going to break that journey into different parts and answer a separate part of that question. That's what the aims are. Then the aims has their children, which is called objectives. So the objectives are the children of the aims. And the objectives tells us specific ways we're going to answer that question, right? Now, remember that you are the one in the driver's seat. You are the one driving this bus or this car. If the proposal gives you 3 aims and you don't want 3 aims, well, it's not nobody's forcing you. You can remove the ones, you can just select the ones you want. So again, remember that it's just the AI toolkit is just supposed to help you. And you can use the help or you cannot use the help or however you want. So you can choose, oh, okay, I don't like this. I don't care about that part. I'm just going to focus on this. So you can just use any part of it as you so desire. It's not a requirement written in stone that you have to use every part of it.
How do we assess the risk of bias and quality of the articles retrieved from the search?
You evaluate it by downloading the articles and reading them, and then doing an objective appraisal of the work, just as you will appraise for any other study. So let me also clarify that I think there's also sometimes this misconception that if you use an AI tool, somehow it's supposed to do everything for you. No, it's supposed to assist you, but you are still the one doing the work. If someone says, hey, come and help me carry this stuff, and I go and like, okay, carry it all by yourself, I'm like, okay, are you serious? I thought you said I should come and assist you. Right? So you should realize that there's expectation that you are the one doing the work. The tool is just assisting you, but you still have to do the work, the bulk of it. So think of any question like, oh, how do we assess the veracity of the papers? How do we know whether there's bias? Well, you go and read the papers. The AI is supposed to just help you and convert a blank sheet of paper to something so you have somewhere to start from.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I'm going to read the last one and then I'll get back to those who are asking questions verbally. What is the difference between empirical and systematic review? Does each specific objective translate to a journal article?
A journal article is just means a journal article is not a thing. A journal article is anything. There are different types of journal articles. You can have an opinion piece. You can have a letter to the editor. So let us not conflate a journal article with anything of note. There's nothing interesting in something being a journal article. Anything can be a journal article. In fact, an obituary can be a journal article. When we have people who are notable in science and die, well, we write their obituaries in science as an article. So anything can be published. That in of itself is not interesting. So now, and when we say something is empirical, we need to also understand root words. One very important way to learn is to, when we see a word we don't understand, because fundamentally, especially at the doctoral level, one of the skills, the most important skill we need to build is the art of learning how to learn. Like and so one way to do that is to look at the etymology, the root meaning of words, right? So when we come across a process that we don't understand, most of the words are self-evident in their etymology, their root words. So if you look at, okay, what does etymology mean? What does empirical, for example, mean, right? So let's look at that together. So we can see how we can break down words into their basic meaning so that we now understand. Because again, if you're at the graduate level and upwards, well, the goal is not just to have information given to us, but we must learn how to learn. So when so you go and just say etymology. Etymology means the root word. Etymology of empirical, or you can even use, ChatGPT, in the era of ChatGPT, empirical. And you see a lot of dictionaries that just focus on etymology, right? And you can read. So etymology, from here you can see that when we say something, an empirical process, or that we're empirically investigating something, means that there's an approach to it, right? It just means that there's a structured way of doing it. And so now an empirical review does not necessarily translate into a systematic review, although empirical means structured. But even the other ones we discussed are all structured. A narrative review is structured, of course, because there's a structure to it, even though it's not reproducible. It's not everything that is structured that is reproducible. So but won't talk about a systematic review. There are minimum criteria that any study that claims to be systematic review must meet. Number one, it must have at least 2 people do it. Number 2, we must search at least 2 databases. Number 3, and most important, it must be reproducible, because we must have a protocol for it, right? Those are elements that have to do with, with systematic review. But by and large, I always encourage folks to focus more on the underlying philosophy or the underlying principles, rather than just the, words that may just be buzzwords, really, but do not really carry any meaning. So if you want to do a systematic review, regardless of what you want to call it, just know the basic things that you need to do for it to be called systematic. Once you are done with that, it doesn't really matter what you call it. You can call it a structured literature review. The terms don't even matter, right? As far as you understand what is required of you and you execute accordingly. Semantics are just semantics that don't really move the needle from point A to point B. All right, next question.
Emmanuel.
Prof, thank you. So the question I wanted to ask is, for a systematic review that perhaps the perhaps you've assessed database and there were not a lot of literature. Maybe perhaps the primary research, there are not enough a lot of primary research for that. Could you subscribe to using maybe a scoping review for that, owing to the fact that there are not a lot of primary research for that particular topic? Then the next question I would like to also ask is, so if you have run a sensitivity test for maybe the systematic review you want to do, and there are a lot of heterogeneity, maybe in the methodology or in the design, or perhaps in the patient population, is there an alternative you could use in this instance, or would you still go ahead to run a meta-analysis for that particular research question? And then the third question and the final one is, for this specific undertone that is being used for a systematic review, such like effectiveness. Is that an expansion of that a kind of the word someone could use in that regard? Thank you.
Okay, all right. So I want to simplify your question since so that everybody understands, and so I can also remember. And number one is like, oh, what do we do when we have very few studies in the systematic review? Number two, what if the studies we're using for systematic review are apples to oranges? Very different. What do we do? Number three is, what does effectiveness mean, and what other words can we use? In a nutshell, that's what you're asking.
Yes, thank you. Yeah.
Okay, so the first question, I do a systematic review and I find 5 papers. What do I do? Well, maybe you didn't need to do a systematic review. That's what it means. Remember, why do we do systematic reviews? We do systematic reviews when we have equipoise in the literature. Equipoise means that there's a lot of work done and we have noise, we have confusion. Some studies say this, some studies say that, and we are stuck as to where do we go. There's an equipoise in the literature. That is the most important reason we do systematic reviews, so that it provides clarity. It takes all this evidence and summarizes the body of evidence and say, this is what the average says. So if you're doing a study and you have only 3 studies, well, there's likely very little equipoise there. There's no confusion because there's no studies published, period. So it might suggest that, oh, you just like the idea of doing a systematic review and you wanted to do one, or that it's, so the first question I would then ask you is that, how did you even come up with this idea of doing a systematic review? Like, where did this idea come from? Because it doesn't appear that there's a need for a systematic review, at least not at this point. So maybe you just wanted to do a narrative review, which is just, or maybe a scoping review. Again, this is why it's important for us to know why we're doing what we're doing, because it may not be a systematic review that we need. It could be just a scoping review to see, oh, what even exists out there, right? Or a mapping review that says, oh, or even a rapid review that says, let's just even see what's out there, but definitely not a systematic review, because in that kind of context, there's no need for it. The second question was about heterogeneity in studies. Heterogeneity simply means, it's just a big word that means things are different. Like we're comparing apples to oranges. Now, how do studies get to be apples or oranges? Well, it could be the methodology that was used. So you had one study that was a cohort study and calculated, let's say, risk ratios. And you had another study that was a case control study that calculated odds ratios. Now you're comparing risk ratios and odds ratios. Or it could even be the same type of study. Let's say you have a cohort study in 2 arms, two different cohort studies. One followed people for 10 years and calculated the risk at the end of, so you have a 10-year risk. The other followed people for 1 year and calculated a 1-year risk. Now, first of all, you must know there is heterogeneity. This means that you should know science enough to know that a 1-year risk and a 10-year risk are not the same. If you don't understand that, then we have serious trouble. We have a problem, because how do you even correct something you do not know, right? So it's not just about reading the studies and say, oh, I see there's a cohort study, and the devil is always in the details. You need to know the science of how things were measured, right? So how do you address heterogeneity? Well, you make sure you're making an apples to apples comparison. So if the study, for example, scenario number 1, we can convert, risk ratios to odds ratios, so that they're all odds ratios, right? We can also try and estimate the 1-year risk for the 2 studies, so that we're comparing apples to apples. The biggest problem is that people do not even understand. A lot of people who do systematic reviews do not even understand the fundamental issues involved in terms of measurement, right? They just see studies and they say, oh, and they just copy them and just publish, and like, okay, we have a little problem here, because you don't seem to understand the nuances of what you're doing. So the solution to that problem is, first of all, you need to understand the basics of research and how we measure things, and how the relationship between different measures of association, and how to convert one from the other, or one to the other. And once you understand those basics, we won't talk so much about heterogeneity issues, because they can then be addressed. The third question you asked was about effectiveness. And we use the word effectiveness to describe effects under real world context. So think of effectiveness as a poor man's version of efficacy. So when we do studies under controlled settings, controlled environments, we talk about efficacy. So if the patients were supposed to receive 2 milligrams at 2 p.m. every day in a controlled environment, well, they receive 2 milligrams at 2 p.m. every single day. In the real world, well, patients don't do that. They take 1 milligram whenever they want, then they forget. So when we look at how effective or the performance of a treatment or an intervention under messy real-world context, that is when we talk about effectiveness. Under experimental conditions, we talk about efficacy. So you can obviously have an intervention that worked very well under controlled environments. In other words, had efficacy, but it's not effective when we look at it under real-world context. Obviously, that's possible. All right, next question.
Okay, I'm going to read another question. My thesis topic is impact of implementation of WHO surgical safety checklist on pediatric surgical patient outcomes. Which design will I use for it? Again, which AI tool will I use my work? Thank you, sir.
Thank you. So it is impossible. Issues of research question or what? Those are questions that you, the investigator, must answer, right? Because we can answer that question in 1 million ways. So, it's not a question that I can answer because it depends on a whole million things. So for example, you said the effectiveness of adopting this checklist on health outcomes. Well, I can do that background has started again. I'm not sure what triggers it. Anyway, what was I saying? Okay, yeah, the research question was, what is the relationship between adoption of this checklist and health outcomes? Like I said, there are a million ways we can explore that research question, and that's why we cannot answer it. You are the one who has to answer that question because you understand your context. I can decide to do a quasi-experiment. A quasi-experiment is simply a one-arm intervention study where instead of having two groups that we are randomizing to an intervention or no intervention, we only had one group that we had an intervention in, and then we compare it to control that was just observed, right? That is the design. We can choose to do a cohort study where we follow different facilities over time, those who follow the checklist and those who do not follow the checklist, and we see the performance over time. We can do a randomized experiment where we randomize, cluster randomization of facilities or hospitals or clinics to checklist plus standard of care or just standard of care and see the outcomes, right? We can do a cross-sectional study where we just survey folks and see. I mean, like it's impossible to tell you this is the design. You, the investigator, it's your job to know the design and say, here is what I want to do, and I want to use this design. It's an easier question to answer when you say, I want to do let's say a case control study, right? How will I design it? That's an easier question because issues of study design are also issues of logistics and cost. The budget I'm going to give you for a cohort studies and a case control study or an experiment are obviously different. So that's why it's impossible to answer questions like that without a lot of nuance into it. But bottom line, you can answer that question in many, many, many ways. All right. I thought there was a second part to that question, but I cannot remember. But we can ask the next question.
Hello.
Yes.
My name is Nancy. I would like to ask question about the objectives that the AI can generate. Now, I don't know. Do you think they point to a particular gap, or you have to figure that out? Yeah, because I feel like for you to be doing the research, there has to be a gap you're aiming at, right? So when you look at the way the AI generates the questions, does it consider gaps or you have to figure it out?
Yeah, so it considers gaps, but not all gaps are equal. The importance of a particular gap over another is defined by context. Now, you, the investigator, are the only one in the world who can answer that question of contextually which gap is more important, because you are the one doing the work. So that's why it gives you a whole lot of options so that you can then decide to tailor which one you want to use for your study. Now, that is something that AI cannot do for you, that you have to do for yourself. Does that answer your question? Okay, let's take the next question.
I guess she's muted now. All right. Let's see. Kau. Oh, oops. Did I mute you? Sorry, Kau. You can unmute again.
Okay. All right. Can you hear me?
Clearly.
Hello. Thank you very much. Prof, thank you for a wonderful presentation. I have 2 questions that I want to ask. The first one has to do with the Chi-Square platform. I want to know more about this platform. Is it like a ChatGPT platform where one can chat and get some results? I just want to know more about this platform. Though I joined late, so maybe this might have been addressed in the past. And secondly, you made mention of PICOTS, and you explained that the P is population, but you have not show us the other abbreviations there. That is the ICOTS, how we can apply it to research. These are my questions. Thank you very much, sirs.
All right, thanks. So we covered PICOTS extensively last week. So what might benefit you is to go and watch a video of that class. But in a nutshell, the abbreviation is P for population, I for intervention. Intervention is the exposure you're trying to look at. The C is for control or the comparison. In general, we always try to have a comparison group so that we know that the results we are seeing are not just because of chance or because of trending towards the mean or just because we are looking, right? That helps us to control for other things like seasonal trends or many other things that could be alternative explanations. The O is the outcome and the T is the time we're looking at, whether it's a cross-sectional longitudinal study, and the S is the study design. So please go back and watch the video where we explain those things in great detail, and actually the past 2 lectures. The second question was, is Chi-Squares a ChatGPT? No. The goal is not to build what other people have built. Chi-Squares is the AI toolkit is just a small part of the Chi-Squares platform. It's a one-stop shop for research where if you want to do anything related to research like sample size calculation or sampling or collect data, whether it's cross-sectional data or longitudinal data, you can do so on the platform. And so it's the Chi-Squares platform addresses the S in PICOT, because you can do the S in PICOT stands for study design. So the uniqueness of the Chi-Squares platform is that you can do literally any type of study design on it. You can design case control studies, you can design longitudinal studies or cohort studies. You can obviously design cross-sectional studies and and lots more. And one of the things we're going to be doing in the next few months or weeks is to have special sessions to see, we'll pick each study design, like case control studies, and say, okay, what is a case control study to start with? From very, very basic principles. And how do you set it up on the Chi-Squares platform? See, so that if you want to publish evidence that is more rigorous, and you don't just want to use a basic survey, how do you even go about that? The same thing with cohort studies or experiments. So we're going to be doing that. So just stay on the lookout for that. Next question.
Okay, Emiola.
Okay, good evening,
Hello.
sir. Thanks so much for the very insightful lecture, sir. My question is basically at variance with the presentation, but it's still somehow we can converge it, sir. So take for example someone who is trying to pursue masters or probably PhD at diaspora, and then some of these personal statements are actually we should infuse a little bit of proposal. So how best can you advise? How best can we deal with that, sir? Especially schools in the US and the UK, sir. Thank you.
It's you know, well, in your personal proposal, as the name implies, personal, should try to avoid generalities. It's a personal proposal is definitely not a place where you can you're required or supposed or expected to show your mastery of the subject, because the question that then arises is that if you seem to know epidemiology so well, why then do you still need to do a master's in public health? Maybe you should come and teach us. So your what you really want to establish in a personal proposal is where you're coming from, and not spend too much time on that. What you hope to get from a program, and how you plan to use the knowledge you've gotten to change, maybe not change the world, but at least make some changes around you. So if it's a program in, let's say, epidemiology, clearly what epidemiologic challenges have you encountered, and what do you hope to get from a program, and how do you plan to use that? Next question, please.
Yeah, thank you very much, Prof. and colleagues. It was a well presentation. I picked so many things. Now I have one to three concern. One is about I need you to help me explain more on the Boolean operators, where you were talking of the and or. So I did not get that well. I want to get it first hand, so that when I go for further reading, I'm able to conceptualize it. Secondly, is about the use, especially the systematic review, where you talk about in this review you consider many journals or database. Many journals, you review many articles in order for you to grab the issue you are trying to investigate. Now that also begs a question of when you say many, because when you talk of many, 2 and 3 is already many to how to what extent. That is it. And then thirdly is about having a database involving journals of could be journals of low impact factor or journals of high impact factor. What advice would you give to me and colleagues who also desire to have that basic understanding about it? So briefly is what I can ask for that.
Okay. So first question about what are Boolean operators? You can kindly mute yourself. I think there's a lot of background static when folks are not muted. Thank you. So Boolean operators they are magic words. Think of them like magic words, which we use in creating logic in programming. So when we write code, that's their origin. But we also use them extensively with search terms, because every search term you have is literally an expression of logic. computer logic, where it goes in there, searches for the database, and then pulls out the results that match that criteria. So there are magic words that we use to make our results more or less in terms of number. If you want more results, that means that we want the results to be more sensitive. Then we can use the Boolean or. Think of or and more. There is or in more. more has or in it. So more or will give us more results, and will give us fewer results. So in a nutshell, that's what Boolean operators are. The second question about how many is good enough for a systematic review. In general, we want to stay away from giving arbitrary cutoffs to anything, right? Once we get into that realm where we just now start coming up with numbers, just picking numbers from thin air and just saying this is the rule, those become very arbitrary and meaningless because there's really no inherent meaning to them. What is more important is for us to understand the context for why we're doing what we're doing. Like, first of all, before we even say how many papers do we need for this systematic review, a more important question is why are we even doing it? Like, what is the need for it? And that's a more important question than how many do we need, right? So it's more important for us to pay attention to the context for why we're doing things and than just arbitrary numbers that somebody might give and say, this is the rule. Those rules do not carry weight. And unfortunately, we have so many rules in science that are really just made up, that have no basis whatsoever. But some guy just said, okay, I'm just going to give this rule. In general, I want to stay away from that approach because it's meaningless. Then your third question about impact factor. That is also not a very helpful metric that I would advise that we look at. Because impact factors are really just something that the company started, so it has no basis in science per se. So for that reason, we want to stay away from it because again, impact factors can be manipulated. So for those of you who have served as editors, one of the things is that, well, most editors try to game the system by arbitrarily increasing the impact factors. So there's no point putting a lot of faith or value in any metric like that is just manipulatable. Instead, we want to, again, look at the context. Is this a science? Is this a journal that is peer reviewed? Does it do good work? If it does, where is it indexed? That's a more important question to me than the impact factor, because that is just a vanity metric, nothing more, nothing less. All right, next question.
Al-Bashir.
All right, thank you, Prof. My question is regarding the selection of databases for systematic reviews. There are some papers that publish journals that are not indexed in PubMed or other related databases like Scopus and Web of Science. But then if one includes Google Scholar, it brings out a lot of results, of course, in thousands. But then if we exclude Google Scholar, will it not affect the breadth of the systematic review? And is it okay to still exclude it, given that usually when you exclude it, in some cases, you realize that you have very few outcomes. I'm speaking from an experience of a systematic review we recently did. Including Google Scholar, will generate thousands of papers. But then when we exclude it, there are many papers that were there that we couldn't find them in those that were not indexed in journals published in PubMed and other databases. So how is the best way to approach such situation?
Okay, so first thing to address is that numbers don't mean a whole lot of things in terms of science and validity. So the same idea when we say a very, very, very large sample size doesn't tell you anything about the validity of that study. It's the same thing here, right? So in general, inferences about the size of anything should not carry a lot of weight because it has no ties with validity. The 10,000 you are getting might be some papers that were were written by an 80-year-old guy, or one alcoholic who had a bout of whatever, right? So there's a reason why Google Scholar is not acceptable, in terms of the legitimacy of the papers, in it, because it's hit and miss. Of course, you're going to get a lot of papers that are legitimate scientific papers, but you're also going to get a whole lot of other things, right? And then the search is also the reproducibility of a search also differs based on where you are. If I run a Google search let's say in Atlanta, and you run the exact same thing, the algorithm gives you different results as a context of where you are, right? Now, how then do we establish claims of reproducibility to a process that is so fickle and so arbitrary, right? And so there are many other reasons, right? That's what we prefer. The general preference is on databases that are legitimate scientific databases for research. And that's why Google Scholar, most journals will not even allow you, like if you were doing a systematic review and the mere mention of Google Scholar there throws a lot of doubt on all your results, because it's like, okay, that is not consistent with the rules of a game for what is acceptable and not acceptable as a database. So let's pay less attention about is retrieving thousands upon thousands of results, but what really is in those thousands upon thousands of results? Is it good work? Is it peer-reviewed work? Is it work from credible journals, right? Google Scholar picks all of those things up. Papers that are from sham journals, papers that are from everywhere, they're all picked up by Google Scholar. And that is a problem, because you now end up including papers that ought not to have been included because they do not pass they do not meet the standards of good science. Okay, next question.
Thank you. Let me see if there's something I can read here. What is the possibility of knowing the type of research method to use from the research topic?
None, except, with exceptions. You should first of all have one of the ethical requirements for research is that the person doing the research is qualified to do research. And that presupposes that you have at least a basic understanding of research methods, right? So the research method will tell you, and it's all contextual. So a research question, just by reading the title, it doesn't tell you what design should be used. It's a question of what do I want? And this is why we'll go back to the story of the guy in the car. This image. Where are you going? I have no idea where I'm going. Okay, that's very ridiculous, right? You need to know where you're going first. The guy needs to know where he's going, and then it's like, okay, that's fine. The same thing, right? When we come up with a research question and we should have at minimum one, a hypothesis. Where do I think this is going to lead? Number two, how do I want to explore this? And that diverges into two, right? What are we trying to achieve? Am I simply trying to quantify the burden of a problem? Or am I trying to measure a relationship between two things? So we now start asking those questions of ourselves. And that's that drilling down the question. Next question is, how much money do I have? Those are questions that nobody else has the answers except you. You are the one who said, I'm going to investigate this. You are the one who knows the context. You're the one who knows how much money you have in your pocket. You're the one who knows the target audience. So you're the only one who can suggest, of all the alternatives you have, which design is most appropriate for you. I hope that makes sense. So maybe one of the workshops we'll host is one where we'll take one research question and we will literally design every single possible study design based on that one research question. Perhaps that will help emphasize to you how dynamic study design is. That with that one single topic, we can literally carve every possible research question from it. So, so the topic alone, bottom line.
Okay, thanks. Dr. Abayomi?
Yes, thank you so much, Prof, for a brilliant presentation as always. Yeah, I have 3 questions. I'll quickly mention them. Number 1, some editors or researchers believe that we have that they belong to the school of thought that systematic review or meta-analysis has to be done by some kind of experts with years of experience in that field. I just want to know your thoughts about that. That's number 1. And number 2, how do we get full text articles for our, probably after searching, and we're just getting abstracts. And then we want to go into the nitty-gritty, we want to know the tables, we want to know the design and all of that, but we are not privileged to have some of these things. So how do we get some of those articles, full text articles? Because we know that some of these may just be paid for, probably, and maybe we don't have the access to that or money to buy. Then lastly, I observe you showed us a scatter plot in one of those or two of those articles you showed us. For a systematic review or meta-analysis, how do we derive that? I know this is just one class, which just a single class. I know you cannot just address everything, but I just want to have an idea of how can one generate such a thing when you want to do a meta-analysis and all that. Thank you, Prof.
So the first question, how many years of experience do you need to have to do a systematic review? Like I said earlier, we want to really stay away from very arbitrary rules like those because they're meaningless. Like it doesn't make any sense. So no, there's no number we will say this is the number, this is the number of years of experience. It's actually a very funny way you think of it. So no, that does not exist. Number 2, your question was sorry, I've forgotten question number 2. Where do we get the pass from? Well, if you don't have money and you want to pass the firewall, there are a lot of illegal sites, but obviously I cannot recommend an illegal site. So you will have to go to your university librarian and ask them, or you just reach out to the authors and ask them. And then for creating a forest plot, we already have you should go on our YouTube channel. We have a video that shows step by step that we've done in the past. So that will help you learn how to do it.
Thank you, Prof.
Welcome.
Okay, let me just read a question from YouTube. You said every research, irrespective of design, should have a hypothesis, but these hypotheses always have a null and alternative hypothesis irrespective of the research design type. Can you explain that?
Okay, good question. So we want to make a distinction between hypothesis and hypothesis testing, right? The guy tells me that, let's say this same guy, right? Or somebody else says, I am going to go and fix my car. Well, that immediately helps that the only assumption we can make at that point is that he has a car. It's like if you say you're going to fix your car, you have no car, we like, are you okay? Do you need like medical evaluation or psychiatric evaluation, right? So the same way, when you do hypothesis testing, obviously we imagine, and for good reason, that you have a hypothesis that you're testing. So the first step is you come up with a hypothesis, and then you test the hypothesis. If you write a paper and you say, here's my hypothesis testing, obviously I'm going to ask you, what was your original hypothesis? If you don't have any, then there's the problem. So let's look at it critically, right? We will have a study, and so we said one research, we come up with we had an original hypothesis, And then from this, we came up with one research question. So remember, the idea was, oh, we're sitting down, and then this idea came to us. Let's start from here. Rough idea. We're sitting down, we're like, oh wow, why does this thing happen? That's a rough idea. And then in our mind, we say, maybe it's because of this. It would be very bizarre if you came up to do a research and you'd have no hypothesis, you never thought about a possible explanation. That would be really bizarre. Because the question is like, then why are you doing a research? It's even funny when you think about it, right? Like you have no hypothesis whatsoever for what is happening. Then why are you doing it? Like, what are you trying to? It's as ridiculous as that guy who says he's in his car, but he doesn't know where he's going, right? So now you have this hypothesis. My hypothesis is that, so let's say that this is my hypothesis, is that X will be higher among group B than group A, right? Whatever it is. So that's my thinking. I'm like, I wonder why the rate of whatever, right? I can't even think of a good example. Rate of, or think of something silly. Some outcome, or is higher among group A than group B. Or I'm wondering why this happens among this group a lot. Or I'm thinking, why does this community have so many twins? Like, why every household I go, there are twins? What could be responsible? And then I'm like, maybe there's something they're eating that is just predisposes them to having twins. Or there has to be something genetic, or there's something that makes this community different than the other community. I can't just jump from an idea and say I'm going to do a research without having had a hypothesis for what I think might be explaining that. That idea is what we call the hypothesis, right? You're like, okay, I think that in this community, the food, there are different patterns, or there are nutritional differences between this group and the next community. So the question then is, how do I test this hypothesis? Well, that means I have to collect data, and then I have to now subject a test. Now, from my hypothesis, so the point I'm trying to make is that from that hypothesis, we come down all the way later to hypothesis testing. Now, you can agree with me that it would be quite ridiculous for you to say you're doing hypothesis testing when you don't have a hypothesis. That's like saying, oh, I want to go and put fuel in my car, but I have no car. It's like, are you okay? You need to have a hypothesis to test the hypothesis. Now, this is now statistics. Hypothesis testing is statistics. Hypothesis is not statistics in of itself. Hypothesis simply means an idea. So this is why you can now understand why every study has a hypothesis, including qualitative studies, because having a hypothesis and testing a hypothesis are two different things, or statistically at least. So in my hypothesis testing, I have to now frame it in a way that statistics can understand, or that a computer can understand, because I'm going to pass it through a computer software. So I now say that there's a null, which is saying that no differences in diets between village A, between inhabitants of community A and B, right? The alternative is that there is a difference, right? So this is framed in mathematical ways so that we can evaluate it mathematically. So this hypothesis testing came or arose only because I already had an hypothesis. I said, oh, these twins I'm seeing, every household I go in this community, I see twins. I think that the reason why they have twins is because the food is different. There's something in the food. Because why then is my research question saying, comparison of food or dietary patterns? Why diet? Well, it's diet because my hypothesis says it's diet. The hypothesis is what leads to the research question being framed the way it is, and the objectives being framed the way they are. Everything derives from the hypothesis. So, in a nutshell, to keep a long story short, hypothesis is needed for every study. If you have no hypothesis in your study, it begs the question of why are you doing the study if you have no hypothesis at all? All right, next question, please.
Yeah, the hypothesis issue. Why do we need a hypothesis do we need a hypothesis for qualitative studies? And there's another one. Doesn't research questions or objectives give direction of the study? If you have those, why do you need hypothesis in, say, cross-sectional study? And the last one,
Okay, go ahead.
yeah, is hypothesis compulsory in every study?
So the interesting question there is, we have a research question. Why do we need a hypothesis? Well, it's like saying, oh, this child has life. Why do we need the father? Well, the child owes this life from the father. So, or the mother, or whatever the case might be. One births the other. The question came because we had a hypothesis. So it's like, why are we saying the research question is there an association between diets and having twins? That's a research question. But where did that research question came? Where did it come from? Well, it came from our hypothesis. Our hypothesis was that, well, we think there has to be something about this food these people are eating. Hypothesis gives rise to the question. The reason why we frame the question the way it is because of what we have hypothesized. Remember that research is an intellectual activity. There is a reason why we decide to investigate something, right? Even in crime scenes, investigators, crime detectors come and say, okay, I have a theory that this guy and that guy were friends and they somehow, whatever happened, right? Even detectives have theories they work with. So you can't do research without having an underlying theory of what you expect to see. Then that's no longer research. You're just on a fishing expedition. Not having a hypothesis is like, oh, I'm just gonna do a random pick of some random topic, and whatever I find, I will publish it. There has to be some intellectual activity that says this is what I think this is all about, and I'm going to investigate and see where it takes us. So yes, every study must have a hypothesis. Now, must the hypothesis be clearly stated explicitly as this study hypothesis was so and so? No. But the hypothesis could be implied, but it must be there. In fact, that's where you started from. So I hope that is clear to everybody.
Thanks, Prof. Ibrahim Musa. Can you unmute yourself?
Thank you.
Okay.
Yes, thank you for this opportunity. I'm asking for bias criteria. That in my research area, my study area, people are talking in English, but most talking Arabic. About to want to ask that to translate the questionnaire from English language to Arabic language to me to the participants to complete the questionnaires and how it's appear. And also I have a question about the inclusion and exclusion criteria. My research project is focused on a specific age group, specifically children under 5 years of age. This is inclusive. What is exclusive that other age group more than 5 years, and also the place in a specific state, and exclusive other state of the country, and also can I add the research team more than one, and also can I prepare the questionnaire that based on the mode of transmission of sudden outbreaks like cholera to write a question. Can I use the mode of transmission of the specific disease like cholera, sudden outbreak, and also this disease cholera specific study type? Can I use a cross-sectional? And thank you for this opportunity.
Okay, there are a lot of questions there. I'll try and see if I can remember them.
But briefly, can you answer?
Yeah.
You can answer briefly.
Yeah, that's fine. And I promptly forgotten all of them. Okay, I think the first one was translation. Yes, you want to translate your survey into Arabic. Well, on the Chisquares platform, you can translate your survey into any language. So you should definitely take some time and try that out. The second question was about the difference between you have some age groups and is that inclusion or exclusion? Again, I go back to the mantra, the philosophy that let us not worry too much about semantics. As far as you understand the principle of what inclusion criteria are and what exclusion criteria are, you can call anything whatever you want. You can treat age as an inclusion criteria or as an exclusion criteria. It doesn't really matter. As far as you know how to define the population, oh, we're fine, right? So there's no rule of thumb that this is how you must treat things. And a particular variable could be inclusion or it could be exclusion, depending on how you frame it. So the point is that you should feel very empowered as the investigator to do a lot of things. It's your study. As far as you understand the basics of what the research is, let us just try and stay away from unnecessary rules or semantics, because those really don't take us from point A to point B. Third question was about whether you can use a cross-sectional survey for a topic on cholera. Again, you can use any study design for most things, right? So it's not an issue of whether you can use cross-sectional study for cholera. It depends on what's the research question and what's the context. So once again, that's only something that you can understand. So what will help you is to go back and read or watch our videos on study design. Look at the different types of study design that exists. You have to educate yourself to some basic minimum on study design, and then you can do the research, right? That way you can be sure that the research is fit for use and fit for purpose. All right, next question.
Okay, can I speak?
Yes, please.
Live.
Okay, I'm not sure exactly sure what's happening.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you clearly.
Can you hear me, sir? Can you hear me?
Clearly.
Can you hear me?
I can
Hello,
hear you.
sir?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, I had watched the way you used it to generate like an introduction so that one can use it as a startup during writing. So my question now is, if I have done a research, I have a result. I had analyzed my result, prepared some in table, prepared all the rest in graphs. And I'm now about doing the discussion part of that result. Is it possible to upload something like my table into your AI platform and it will, with instructions of what I did as like asterisk means so and so p-value? Will you be able to like generate a discussion for me where I can use as a base and now do my work? Is it possible?
So let us just focus rather on what would be ideal for you to do instead, because there are a lot of things that are possible in this world. That doesn't mean that they are good, right?
Okay.
So what would be ideal in your case is to understand your paper and come up with 3 important sentences, just 3 sentences. One, what is the most important finding from this whole study? Surely that is obviously relevant contextually. But no AI can do that for you, right? They can tell you a million things that are important, but in my environment, what is most important? That's sentence number 1. Now, and how can I use that in my environment? Number 2, what was the most surprising thing that I found in this whole study, right? AI cannot know what surprised you or what, you're the one who found it surprising or what you found notable. And then number 3 is like, okay, how does this compare with other studies? Like, and that's all your discussion. So you should start from somewhere first and then say, okay, now how do I flesh this up? But just the point I'm trying to make is that, we don't want to substitute our own what we need to do. versus what AI should do for us, right? You know, AI is just a tool that's supposed to help us, not replace us. Now, having said that, we're releasing the final version of the Chisquares platform in a few weeks that will be able to do all of that. But even in that process, we've ensured that we've instilled best practice in it, so that there is still some level of, it's like a collaboration between you and the machine or the AI, so that it assists you but does not replace you. Because what we're trying to solve is to reduce just manual labor, not to replace human intellect in the whole process. All right, next question.
Sakibu.
Okay, I have 3 questions.
You
First
guys
of all,
ever have one question only? I'm just curious.
I just wanted to understand the difference between the search terms and key terms. And then the second question, I just wanted to, okay, you spoke about the discussion. So I just wanted to know what needs to come. What do you need to put when you're doing the conclusion? In cases where there is a conclusion, what needs to come, which is different from the discussion? And then the third question, okay, currently from my dissertation, I'm trying to write an article, an academic article. So I just wanted to, it's qualitative in nature. So I just wanted to understand, if I use this tool, will it work? So those are the 3 questions that I have. Thank you.
Okay, so I'll start from the last question. If I use this tool, will it work? I'm not sure exactly what you're using it for. I'm not sure what it's intended to do. That's not a question I can answer. You have to figure out, first of all, what you're trying to achieve. The tool is not a panacea for all your troubles, right? It won't solve your financial problems, domestic problems, and everything in the world. It's designed to solve very specific things. So you will have to just try, you have to define what the ask is and then try accordingly. The other question, the difference between search terms and keywords. Again, let us not worry too much about semantics. That is not interesting, doesn't take us from point A to point B. You can call it whatever you want to call it. As far as you know how to construct a search term and you know how to use Boolean operators and to refine your search, we're all fine, regardless of whatever you called it. So bottom line, let's try and stay away from undue focus on semantics, because it's not helpful. All right, next question.
Okay, I'm trying to read one question. What's the difference between justification of a study and significance of a study?
Potato. You can call it justification, you can call it significance, but again, like I said, whatever you call it, just emphasize how the study moves the needle from point A to point B. And whatever term you call it, we're fine.
Okay, let me head over to YouTube and read from there. Can a research have multiple research questions or multiple hypotheses, or are both of them always singular?
Ideally, we want to have one big, well-defined research question. When you have, remember the first lecture we had, we talked about TMQ, too many questions. When you have too many questions, it begins to read like it becomes complicated. So keep it simple. The principle is try and have one well-defined question for one paper. And then that one question can have a couple of aims, but it should all drive back to one large overarching question.
How do you use softwares, for example, Prisma, for systematic reviews?
Prisma is not a software. Prisma is just a guideline or a flow to help us think about things. So we also don't want to ever become The software is only as good as our thinking capabilities or our understanding of the subject. The goal is not to train to have a group of professionals who can click and generate results without understanding. So step number one, understand the context you're dealing with, understand the research question, understand the methodology. Step number two, then you can use the software or whatever thing you're using to help you. But it cannot help you when you have no contextual understanding of what you're trying to do. No software can save you. At that point, all you need is God.
Thanks again, Prof. I was meant to understand that quantitative studies aim at testing theories and as such involve hypotheses, while qualitative studies aim at theory development that may not involve hypothesis testing. Please, can you shed more light?
Okay, so like I mentioned earlier, hypothesis testing is inherently statistical. You test hypothesis statistically. However, you can have a hypothesis that does not involve hypothesis testing. And so that was the whole purpose of going through this, right? Hypothesis mainly means which direction am I going? Now, if it's a statistical issue, we can now subject to statistical testing, right? So even qualitative studies should have hypothesis. Of course, we're not going to test it statistically, but at least we know where we're going. Hypothesis simply says, this is where we're going with the study. Hypothesis comes first, and it is what gives rise to the research question, how we frame things.
Thank you. One last question. Is identifying, did I read this one? Is identifying a population gap and addressing it a valid prerequisite for conducting research?
Yes. A research should aim to fill a gap in knowledge. A research paper is not an essay where you're writing my favorite trip and you're telling us what happened no, it's supposed to fill a gap in knowledge. So if you don't identify the gap, if there's no gap, then it doesn't really meet the standard of what we call research. For anything to be called research, there must be two things involved. Number one, there must be an intent to create knowledge. Intent. Number two, it must be systematic in approach. Those two things must be present for anything to be called research. Next question, please.
Hassan, can you unmute yourself?
Sorry, hold that
Kelvin.
Second, please.
Okay. Hassan, are you still here?
Yes, I'm still here. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, just a second. Just a second. I was checking. Prof is just give him a few seconds until he's back.
No,
and then Kelvin, you'll be next. Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Lungile, you've answered all the questions in my absence, right?
Yes, yes. There are just a few more. A few more for you.
Okay.
Okay, Kelvin.
Okay, Prof, thank you so much. I have some questions I want to ask. One, how do you generate hypothesis? Are you hearing me?
Yes.
How do you generate, How do you generate hypothesis for every research question? One. Two, how do you write an abstract that you want to present in the conference? Three, and also manuscripts. How do you also how do you develop a presentable manuscript and abstracts for presentation for writing conference? But I've written twice, rejected.
Okay. Well, the rejection doesn't necessarily mean that the work was bad. Of course, it doesn't, it could also have been bad, right? We don't know, so the details of how to write an abstract or how to write, that is way beyond the scope of this presentation. So we'll have to have a session on that in the future. How do you write a hypothesis? Well, hypothesis is what led you to that research question in the first place. So let's not worry so much about the technicalities, right? What did you think you were going to find? Like, what direction were you taking? So let's not overcomplicate it. Like, hypothesis simply means that when I was sitting down thinking about this research question, this is how I thought the direction would go. Well, just write it down that exact same way, right? So, like I said, you've come up with a hypothesis, then later on you test it statistically if it's a quantitative study. But the other questions about writing of papers and abstracts, that is well beyond the scope of this session, and we'll address them at the future session. Right, next question, please.
Okay. Mohammed? Mohammed, are you still there? Okay.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, Prof, for all the knowledge and responses. I'm a PhD student, and I'm into modeling of infectious diseases. In the course of my research, I came across some problems. I'm trying to model some of the diseases across Nigeria. Now, the problem is that there's a model I came across. A professor from US used that model. Now, if I replicate that model in Nigeria, because the place he used was in Rwanda, if I replicate that same research using the model but different data in Nigeria, which has never been done before, does that suffice for a PhD research? Thank you, Prof.
Well, so it depends on who, so no, that would not qualify in of itself for a PhD work. A model is simply a mathematical equation where we plug in, and based on our assumptions, we get results. Now, if you are the one who built the model and validated it, and then I'll say, well, that's reasonable, right? That is a substantial amount of work. But simply taking an existing model and just plugging in the values into the model will not be what would qualify as substantial enough work for a doctorate. So there has to be some, now it could be part of that body of work, right? But it has to be more. There has to be a lot more to it than simply plugging in values. And again, the question that we even need to ask, first of all, is why do we need to model it? We use mathematical models where we don't have data, right? Models simply are a simplification of nature, where so the order of priority is we use data where we have data, and when we cannot have data or we cannot find data, we model. That's why we use models. So the question is, do we have data? Why don't we have data? How can we get data? Right. So if I was supervising your work, my first jump won't be to, oh, let's model. No, my first reaction will be asking you, why do you need to model in the first place? And so if you cannot answer that question in a convincing manner, then, that mission is dead on arrival. So that will be the order, because the whole point of the work of the PhD process is to generate work that can be used to influence policy. The problem with of course, any day, anytime, we'll pick observe data where we can over models, because any model is only as good as the assumptions that went into it, right? And so if I were a supervisor, it would be like, okay, how do we get data? How do we, because that process, that journey of getting data will give you a lot of concrete skills in everything about the design, implementation, analysis, and interpretation of data, right? Because then you will have to become very proficient with study design. You will have to learn about managing bias and threats to validity. You will learn about data collection. You will learn about a whole lot of things that you will otherwise not have learned. Because when you come out and we confer on you a doctorate, we are telling the rest of the world that this person is a methodologist. This person is skilled in methodology. So but that argument could be quite hard to be made if the breadth and depth of the work done is not sufficient to guarantee that you actually learned the scope of research. So that becomes a problem. But at the end of the day, that's just my opinion. Of course, the reality of it depends on your institution, your supervisor, what the standards are. But for me, in general, I tend to demand a little more of my doctorates. All right, next question.
How do we generate a theoretical framework for a study topic?
So that's a question for you to answer. You are the one coming up with the research. So what framework are you using? Like, do you need, first of all, it comes from, we should start with, do you even need to use a framework? Now, people in the social sciences use a lot of frameworks. Now, there are two general ways to go about issues of frameworks or theories. One, you can use an existing theory, which is that there are dozens of theories from socio-ecological theory to health belief model and so on and so forth. You have to figure out which one aligns best with your aims and objectives, right? When you use a theory, you must make sure that you're collecting data on all aspects of that theory. So for example, if I'm using the health belief model as a theoretical framework, I need to collect data on perceived risk, perceived susceptibility, and all the other elements of that theory. So you can use an existing framework, or you could use what we call grounded theory, which means the theory flows from the data, which means I don't need to have an existing theory. When we collect the data, we will know the theory. So again, it's one of those things that instead of the more appropriate answer should be, why do you think you need to use a theory in the first place, right? If you can answer that question, then we can then have a discussion of what theories might be appropriate for your work. All right, next question.
Suleiman? Please unmute.
Can I go ahead?
Yes, please go ahead.
Yes, please.
Hello, can I go ahead?
Yes, you may.
Hello. Okay.
Yes, you can.
From what has so far been discussed, it can be understood that use of AI is allowed in research. So my question is, to what extent can one cross ethical boundaries? In other words, what and what can one do with AI and what he cannot do? That is the question.
Okay, thanks. So, like I've said, a lot of times before, there's certain way we want to think about issues that reflect some nuance, right? So first of all, we want to stay away from things like, some variants of that question has been, what's the cutoff, the number of words that one can use in a paper that will not be flagged as AI? Or how can I use AI in a way that people will not know that I'm using AI? Or I've several other versions, similar versions of that. So that should not be our focus per se, because AI is a tool. If you use SPSS, if you use Theta, if you use R, you are all using tools, right? Nobody ever expects that you will bring your fingers and start counting 1 to 3 to 10 to do analysis. Of course, we all expect that you're going to use productivity tools that will increase your efficiency. That's why we say, oh, awesome. When you use a tool, report it in the analysis. So people write the methodology and say, data were analyzed with fill in the blank, SPSS, for example. Nobody ever says, oh, wow, you analyzed data with SPSS. Why didn't you do it manually to show you have understanding of the theory? You understand? Because for every single thing you do with software, you can do it manually too. You do your regression or statistical tests. Well, we can actually calculate for every test you do with the software, we can do it by hand. We can calculate a 2x2 table and calculate, degrees of freedom and calculate every other thing, the test statistic, and give you the exact same answer with paper. So the question is, why don't we ask people to do it by paper, by hand? Well, because we acknowledge that efficiency is okay. It's okay to have efficiency as long as we understand what's going on, as long as we know that when the software gives us the output, we can interpret it properly. Well, it's the same thing, right? So we can answer questions like, what kind of things should you use AI for? Well, it's impossible to answer that question. You should use AI for things that AI can be used for, but you should be able to know that you are responsible for the work and you should be able to interpret it. The same way we cannot answer the question of, oh, what kind of statistical analysis are we supposed to use software for? And which ones should we do by hand? I can't answer that question because it's up to you. So it's up to you to use AI for whatever you want to use it, but you need to be transparent in how you use it. So if a journal says, did you use AI? Yeah, you should say, yeah, I did. And I use it for so and so. What becomes unethical is when you use AI and they ask you, did you use AI? You said, no, that's straight out lying, right? And that is unethical. So there's no requirement that you use AI. So bottom line, you don't have to use AI. That's a great part of it, right? And on the Chisquares platform, that's something we take very important. For everything you use AI for, there is a manual way of doing it. So you have two options. You can use the manual way or you can use the AI. Nobody forces anybody to use AI. But once you use AI, it's not like it's some dirty little secrets that you use AI, so you have to hide. So when people ask, oh, how do I hide that I used AI? I'm like, why do you feel it need to hide? First of all, I think that's a more interesting question than, because we're not in the business of saying, oh, here's how you're going to hide that you used AI. That is not a legitimate question at all. Okay. Next question.
Okay. Hello. I have the second one is a request, of course.
Sure.
Yeah. In your previous webinars, you used to send to participants emails the recording, and now the new trend is that one has to go to YouTube and then try to get it. If possible, can you still be sending through our emails the recording? Thank you. That is the request.
Well, Lungile will answer to that. I'm not in charge of that, so she will answer you best.
Okay.
We still share the links. We never shared actual recordings. It was always links to recordings. So we still share the links, but it's a link to YouTube, to the YouTube video.
All right, thanks, Lungile. All right, next question, please. Or maybe we've finished the questions.
Abdullah. Okay. Suleiman, Mohammed, okay. Hassan?
Yes, please. Yes, thank you. Hope you are hearing me well. Thanks for the provision. I want to ask one question about the systemic review. As you said, systemic review can be a minimum of 2 outreaches or more. So I was asking, is there any limitations of contributions of the outreach? For example, first author will contribute for certain amount of the scripts and the other one for them. So we can avoid the interest of the conflict of interest. The second thing I want to ask is that, is there any other platforms for the natural science, for example, for the ecological sciences that we can refer, like the PubMed for the medical sciences? There are other platforms that we can go through it. And my last is just a comment or say request for the future trainings. Could you please incorporate with the ecological, or they say natural science modeling or study systems for the future? Thank you.
Okay, thanks. So your question was about number of authors. Well, number of authors has nothing to do with conflicts of interest. Conflict of interest means that there are external issues that are outside of that study that will impact directly or indirectly how this study is perceived. So the number of authors has nothing to do with that. The number of authors might have something to do with publication ethics. If you have a lot of people who are doing nothing and just being awarded authorship, or if there are people who did the work but you do not list them as authors, that's where you have an issue. But there's no relationship between the number of people on the project, and conflicts of interest. Regarding the sources of databases, we've included them in the slides. So when you get the slides, you can review them to see some of them that might be relevant to your use case. All right, next question, please.
Sure. Veronica.
Thank you so much, Prof. Prof, my own question is on data analysis. I was told by someone that there are certain journals, if you stop your analysis at the bivariate analysis without proceeding to do a multivariable analysis, that your manuscript might not be accepted for publication. So I want you to throw light on that. And secondly, I want to find out if after conducting a bivariate analysis and none of the p-value is significant, can I still proceed to do a regression analysis? Thank you, Prof.
Okay, so so the first question about journals not accepting papers that do not have regression analysis. Well, it depends. That depends on what the question is. The research question, let us not focus on the results. Let us focus on what the research question was. That's the whole thing that drives the whole show. If my research question is just it's a simple descriptive analysis, what has been the trends in number of COVID cases reported in my country or in my location, I'm just taking the case series and looking at number of cases. That has nothing to do with regression, right? So why that does not warrant a regression analysis. So a regression analysis is not just a magic wand we wave in the air to solve problems. It has to be married to the research question. We use it to address specific things. So fundamentally, we need to first of all understand, why do we use regression? What problems is it supposed to correct? Are those problems present in my paper? And if they're present, how do we address them? That is the issue there. Like, once we understand those issues, then you can understand why a journal editor makes decisions. As an editor, when I pick a paper, I'm looking at, is this valid or not valid? And I'm examining it through a lot of lenses, right? So I'm not looking at whether the paper has regression. That is of no concern to me. I'm looking at, does this carry threats to validity or not? And how have the authors addressed it? Now, if regression is warranted and was not used, well, then this is a moot point, because your paper is invalid because it doesn't represent the truth. So it's not about regression, it's about the research question and how it has been explored. So let's not look at it backwards. And so again, we also need to understand about, so it's not just a simple answer of, oh, you can proceed when the p-value is so and so. P-values are just arbitrary numbers. So once again, we need to have a fundamental understanding of what we're trying to achieve and why we're using so and so cutoff. Because a p-value may be significant at a particular cutoff, but not significant at another. All right, next question, please.
The AI proposal builder does not have implementation research as part of the study designs to select from. What can one do if your design is implementation science?
Because there is no study design that is called implementation science. Implementation science is just a broad category of, an area of endeavor that has nothing to do with the design of studies. Implementation science can be cross-sectional study, can be a case control study, can be anything. So we need to make a clear distinction between epidemiologic study designs versus the applications. We can use any study design in any application. That doesn't mean that we need a design. That there's no design. Simply put, there's no design called implementation science. The study designs that have been listed on the platform are what exists as epidemiology study designs. And so you have to now figure out, this implementation science you're doing, what kind of study design do you need for it?
Thanks, Prof. Must I do multivariable analysis every time I do a bivariate analysis?
We've answered that question already. A similar variant.
If there are any other questions, please just post them quickly. Otherwise, Abdullah, I believe that's an old hand. So I'm going to lower it. Must Prisma or other guidelines be used when doing a systematic review?
Okay, so in general, also, like I said, right, let's try and avoid the must questions. You don't have to, few things in life I must. Of course, we must breathe to live, we must eat. A few other things, right? But nothing is a must. What is important is that we understand the principles behind what is required. Like what is the Prisma exactly trying to achieve? So that is a more interesting question to answer than must you use Prisma? My next question would be, what do you think the Prisma exactly does? Or what do you think it's saying? Right? So bottom line is we need to understand that everything in the world can be explained by only one of three things: truth, chance, or bias. We want the truth, we want to control bias, we want to control chance. How do we do this? This is now where you have a whole lot of tools and technologies in the world for us to pick which ones we're going to use to address issue of bias and issue of chance. Prisma is just one of many, many, many tools. So if you're not using Prisma, well, hopefully you're using something else. But fundamentally, we hope that you understand what we're trying to achieve, because if we don't understand that, then every discussion is a moot point.
Can you use systematic review articles in a systematic review project?
Depends on what you define as your population. Remember I said you have PICO and you have to define what is the population. So the population means what, in this case of systematic review, what are my studies? So you could say this eligible studies are original, whatever. This is a question of only you can answer that. So in this case, what am I including as eligible studies in my systematic review? Few things in life are absolute no's or absolute yes, all about context.
Moses, please unmute yourself.
Prof.
No, it's also.
Good evening, Prof.
Hello.
Good evening. Please, I have an good evening, Prof. Am I on?
I can hear you clearly, yes.
Yeah. Please, I have an issue with research in especially this part of the world, Africa, mostly. You see, research are towards results being positives. And if students brings something that is contrary, it becomes an issue, because I could remember a scenario where a student, her work was turning to negative, maybe due to some variables. If you see the way the student was fidgeting and even perplexed, and I said, no, it doesn't matter. Result can be negative, maybe as a result of some variables that is beyond the control, which is also, it should be a part of the research that we give more light to what is happening. But in Africa, once the hypothesis say this, how these things will be, is it compulsory that it must tend towards what we assume that it's supposed to be? That's my question.
That's a very good question. And the answer is no. The whole point of research is to try and find out what we do not know. Sure, we can make a hypothesis that we think is going to go this way. But the reality is that it go the other way. That's fine. Now we know it is not this way, it's that way. Right?
Yeah.
And that is why we always require that hypothesis be two-tailed. Two-tailed hypothesis means that, sure, we hypothesize that we think it's going to go this way. But just in case, we're going to test this way and that way. That's what the two tails mean. We're testing this direction and the opposite direction that we never imagine. So that means that right from the beginning, we've opened our mind to the possibility that it could go this way or that way. This is why, we always never want to do a one-tailed. It means that you assume it's going to go this way. So you are saying, I believe it's going to go this way. And I would never test that it could go the other way around. In which case, the question I will ask you, that kind of person is like, then what's the whole point of doing the research then? Like, research is not a process to confirm what you believed. Research is a process where we are open-ended to say that, well, I think it could go this way, but I'm also open to if it went the other way around too. So the short version of the long story is, yes, we that scenario was completely uncalled for, and the person definitely should not have been.
Thank you, Prof, for the insightful insight into it. Thank you very much.
Welcome.
Yeah.
All right. I believe we've answered all the questions.
Yeah, thanks. I think I've heard a lot from Professor, and I enjoyed the session of today very much. Now, my concern is now could now be administrative, may not be necessary to Prof. It is about my earlier concern of having us in that independent WhatsApp platform. And then secondly, the concern of having the next series of webinar after this, how possible it would be.
So I do not get the context for the WhatsApp question, so I would skip the question, unless Lungile has some insights. The other question on the next webinar, yeah, we're going to announce it shortly, so you would see our announcement for the next webinar shortly.
Oh, thank you.
Okay, Barnabas, do you still have a question?
No, that question
Okay,
of
that was a whole hand. Okay,
WhatsApp.
sorry. Okay, sorry. I thought that was a different hand. Okay, I think we've answered all the questions. I'm going to quickly run away before somebody else raises their hand.
Some words of wisdom. I don't know research and it scared me. I don't know why, but I want to learn and also teach it. What do I do to remove fear and love to learn research? Share some insights.
That's it. You have to confront your fears. So research is simple, right? I think what makes research hard is when people just come up with rules, like a lot of rules. It's like, okay, which rules should I follow? So when you remove all these completely arbitrary and completely useless rules that people make about research, and I think it's also not helpful when you have there are a lot of people give out opinions on what research or how research should be done who have no business talking about research, so that makes research sound scarier than it should. So for your use case, I would say that well, try and start from baby steps, small baby steps, right? Take a small project and run it from beginning to end, and that would instill a lot of confidence in you. You don't necessarily have to start designing a randomized trial or a case cohort study yet. You can just start with a small survey, right? And then your confidence grows, and then you can then go ahead and do great things. That's all I can say. I don't know if other folks have words of encouragement to that fellow. Otherwise, that's all I have to say. Lungile, what are your words of encouragement to him or to them?
I just want to read more questions. And people are raising their hands. Where were you all along? Is it not late in your countries?
That is so funny.
Okay. Oh, a third hand. Barnabas. Cow. Cow.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Thank you very much, Prof. And the Secretariat. Please, Prof, I don't want to bother you before about this question I have. I overheard you while you were responding to somebody that has a question about theoretical framework. And this theoretical framework has been issued that has been that had not been clear to me long ago. And when you mentioned that the variables of the studies need to be linked to the theoretical framework, I got it very well. But I still want to an insight into it, because there are some theories that you can't be able to identify the variables directly to those theories. So what I want you to do now is to shed more light about this theoretical framework of it. Thank you very much, Prof.
All right, thanks. So we're going to have, what we'll do is that we're going to have since these people in social sciences are always clamoring for examples specific to them, we're going to have a special webinar dedicated to people in social sciences. And we'll talk about theoretical frameworks and how to, you should, obviously, as a researcher in that space, be able to take a framework and create a questionnaire from a given framework. Or the whole idea of saying that your study is underpinned by a theory is to say that your questionnaire generation process has been informed by that theory. So of course, the theory does not have questionnaires in it, but that's where you come in. You as the expert are supposed to take that theory and create questions that address the length and breadth of that theory. So the question is, how then do you do that? So that's what we're going to cover in that webinar on the social sciences. All right, next question.
Ayo.
Good evening, Prof.
So,
thank you so much for the brilliant presentation. You truly made it has really impacted my life, and I'm grateful for that, sir. So I think the question I want to ask is about the survey form that we were filling. Some of us could not later get to fill it completely. What do we do about that, sir?
Okay, Lungile will answer that question, but Lungile, did you get a question? Some people, they could not fill the form.
I could not hear.
She couldn't fill the form, so she's asking what she could do. All right, let's
Are you here? Can you share your link?
Sir, ma?
We're going to share a link with you so you can take it again.
Okay, thank you, sir. Thank you so much.
All right, the last question for today, Sulaiman Mohammed. And then after that, all the questions will be answered by Lungile.
Thank you very much, sir. My question is about what qualifies one to be included as an author, as a co-author. For instance, if one contributes by reading and reviewing manuscripts, or if one contributes by funding the research, can that qualify him to be included as a co-author? Thanks.
Thanks. So funding research qualifies you to be included in acknowledgements, right? We acknowledge your money.
Okay.
But money doesn't write the paper, right? Money doesn't do research. If funding were a requirement for authorship, then all the personnel at the National Institute of Health, NIH, or whatever funding agency you have, will all be listed as authors, right? Because they funded the research. So no, funding does not qualify you to, in of itself alone, to be co-author. Doing a literature review alone also does not, if a computer, a software can do literature review. There's nothing special about that. The ICMJ criteria for authors lists 4 separate things that must be present for anyone to qualify as an author.
Number 1.
So I will encourage you to review that. But in a nutshell, there that one, the individual contributed to the conceptualization of the research question. So we're starting from a question. Did you contribute to this idea? How did you contribute? Did you refine it? Did you chip in some idea there and then? Did you contribute to the analysis of the work and or the interpretation? You don't have to have analyzed the data, but did you contribute to interpreting the results and and generating insights from the data? Number 3, did you contribute in drafting the paper, right? Did you write the paper? Did you give ideas that helped? Of course, you don't have to have literally typed the work, but if I'm a senior author and I have a meeting with a junior colleague and I say, okay, let's take the manuscript this way, of course, I've contributed substantively, right? So did you contribute in the drafting of a paper? And number 4, do you agree? Do you agree to take responsibility for the work, right? So it's not only when things are going good. When there's trouble, do you agree to be involved in that trouble, right? That is what taking responsibility means. Can you defend the work, right? Those 4 things must be present for anyone to be listed as co-author. So that is the ICMJ criteria for authors. Any other thing is not acceptable. Okay, I hope that is clear. All right, thanks everyone for attending. We will share the topic for our next webinar shortly, and we encourage you to register. And you will get your certificates hopefully next week for this attendance. And should you have any questions, you can drop them in our WhatsApp group. Have a great weekend, everybody.
Thank you, Prof. Goodbye.